Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I didn't expect to see a shape moving inside my living room at 2 in the morning. I just moved into this old apartment building downtown, and I was still getting used to the traffic noise and the creaky floors. The place seemed fine when I signed the lease. It was small, but it had a decent layout, and the rent was within my budget. I liked the tall windows and the vintage fixtures. I thought the building's history gave it some charm. I had no idea I'd be pacing my hallway in the dark, wondering if I was losing my mind. My first few nights were normal enough. I could hear cars rushing by on the street outside at all hours, which made it hard to sleep. Sometimes I'd hear footsteps in the hallway or the elevator clunking a few floors below. The walls and floors in this building are thin, so I tried not to worry about every little sound. I'd flop onto my mattress each night, close my eyes, and eventually drift off, ignoring the background noise. On the night everything changed, I was restless. I'd gone to bed at around midnight, but I couldn't get comfortable. The traffic seemed louder than usual, or maybe I was just more sensitive that night. Around 2 in the morning, I got up to get a glass of water. I was still half asleep and didn't bother turning on the hallway light. I walked barefoot toward the kitchen, which meant passing by the open living room. The living room window overlooks the street, and there's a small couch facing that window. As I reached the living room doorway, I caught a flicker of movement. It was so fast that I wasn't sure if I'd imagined it, but I swear I saw a shadow drift across the space near the window. It looked like a figure, but not a solid one. It was more like a dark shape that moved from the left side of the window toward the corner of the room, then disappeared. It wasn't a reflection from the outside because the streetlights were bright and the curtains were half drawn. I froze. My heart thumped and my breath caught. I leaned forward, squinting in the dark, hoping I would see nothing. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds, my spine tingling and my hands starting to sweat. I listened. No footsteps. No breathing other than my own. The living room felt cold, but the night air had been chilly, so I tried to be rational about it. Still, my stomach was in knots. I stepped into the room, inching my way across the floor. I thought maybe an intruder was hiding. I switched on a small lamp next to the couch and looked around. Everything was as I'd left it. The couch was empty, the window was shut, and my TV and furniture were untouched. I checked behind the couch and inside the narrow coat closet. Nothing. By then I was wide awake, my pulse still racing. I told myself I was overtired. Sometimes the eyes play tricks when you're half asleep, and maybe I just saw my own reflection or a shifting shadow from a car's headlights outside. But it didn't feel that way at the time. It felt like there was a presence there, someone who had no business being in my apartment. I tried to calm down, got my water, and went back to bed. My mind wouldn't stop spinning, so I stayed up reading on my phone until I drifted off around 4 in the morning. The next day I was on edge. Everything looked the same in daylight. There was no sign of anyone sneaking around. I double-checked my door locks and windows. I told myself it was just my imagination. Still, I couldn't shake the uneasy sensation. For the next few nights, I tried sticking to a routine, turning off the lights at midnight, wearing earplugs, and keeping the curtains fully closed. But around 2 or 3 in the morning, I'd wake up for no apparent reason. I'd feel a chill in the air, or a sense that something was just outside my bedroom. I'd lie there, listening. The pipes would clang in the walls and cars would rumble outside. But I'd also think I heard floorboards creaking in the living room. I never had the courage to jump out of bed and check right away. Eventually, I'd fall back asleep, telling myself not to be ridiculous. A few days later, I ran into the building's caretaker, Carlos, in the lobby. He's a quiet guy in his early 50s, always wearing a gray cap and a blue work jacket. I asked him if he knew anything about weird noises or sightings in the building. I tried to keep my voice casual, but I must have sounded nervous because he gave me a curious look. He said the place was old and some people claimed they saw shadows or heard strange sounds over the years. Then he mentioned that a previous tenant in my unit experienced something near that same window. Carlos hinted there had been a tragic incident, but he didn't go into detail. He just said it had happened by the window a long time ago and it left a bad feeling in the unit. He shrugged, as if it was just a rumor he'd heard from older residents. I didn't press him too much, but that explanation sank into my mind. On one hand, it made me feel slightly validated. Maybe I wasn't imagining things. On the other hand, it freaked me out more than I cared to admit. I walked up the stairs to my apartment, half wishing I hadn't asked. As soon as I stepped inside, I glanced over at the living room window and felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. That night, I decided to do some investigating of my own. I sat on the couch around midnight and left the lights off. The only illumination came from the streetlights outside. My window blinds were partially closed, so strips of orange light formed uneven lines on the floor. I sat there quietly, listening for any odd sounds. The building settled now and then, making random thumps or clicks. The radiator hissed. An ambulance siren wailed in the distance. I kept my eyes focused on the space by the window. I could see the corner of my couch and the edge of my coffee table. After about an hour, I got restless. Nothing was happening. I grabbed my phone and started scrolling through social media to pass the time. At one point, I stretched my legs and leaned back, closing my eyes. Then, out of the corner of my vision, I saw something move. I snapped my head up. It was the same shadow, sliding across the window side of the room. It looked like it was pacing along the wall. I couldn't make out features. It was like a dense gray silhouette drifting through the darkness. My body tensed up and I stopped breathing for a moment. I reached out, trembling, and flicked on a small lamp. The glow spread across the floor. I stared at the spot where I'd seen the shape. Nothing was there. My chest felt tight and my skin felt clammy. I stood up slowly, keeping my eyes on that area. My heart thudded, and I started to feel nauseous. I forced myself to walk across the room step by step, checking every corner. I even ran my hand along the wall. It was solid and cold. I felt no difference in temperature as I moved around. I felt foolish standing there in my pajamas, scanning the room for something I couldn't even describe properly. Eventually, I turned off the lamp and went to bed. I couldn't sleep. I just stared at the ceiling, replaying that moment in my head. The next morning, I woke up feeling exhausted. My back was stiff and my eyes were burning. I had to go to work, so I dragged myself through my morning routine, trying not to think about the night before. My day was busy, which helped take my mind off everything. By the time I got home, it was late, and I was running on pure caffeine and stress. I tossed my keys on the counter, ordered some takeout, and ate standing up in the kitchen. I avoided looking at the living room window. I felt a weird sense of dread whenever I walked by it. That night, I decided I would leave the lights on in the living room when I went to bed. It was a silly move, but I just wanted some peace of mind. Over the next few days, I tried different things to feel more secure. I bought a small motion sensor light and put it near the window. I also set up a cheap camera app on an old tablet, aiming it toward the living room, hoping to catch something on video. I started triple-checking all my locks. Still, every night around 2 or 3, I'd jolt awake. My gut would tell me there was something just outside my bedroom door. When I got up to look, I'd find nothing but my furniture and my reflection in the dark TV screen. I played back the camera footage a couple of times. Most of it was just me walking around. Once, though, I saw a flicker of darkness in the corner of the frame. It was so brief that I couldn't be sure if it was a technical glitch or something moving across the living room. The camera's angle wasn't great, and the lighting was dim, but it was enough to make me uneasy. I decided to talk to a couple of neighbors. I ran into a woman who lived one floor down. She mentioned she had heard strange noises at night, but wrote them off as pipes and old building sounds. Another neighbor, an older man, said he'd heard rumors about that particular unit having some history. He didn't seem surprised when I described the shadow, but he also didn't have any concrete explanations. He just said, "This place can mess with your head if you let it." That wasn't exactly comforting. I kept thinking about Carlos's comment. He mentioned a tragic incident near the window. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't push him further. But I wondered if whatever happened had left some sort of imprint. I don't like to consider things beyond my understanding, but this was getting to me physically and mentally. My appetite was shot, my sleep schedule was wrecked, and I was jumpy all the time. I started leaving for work earlier than usual just to get away from the apartment. One night I decided I'd had enough. I wanted to face the situation head on. I turned off all the lights except for a small lamp near the window. I sat on the couch facing the window with my phone camera running in video mode. I told myself I'd wait for an hour. If I saw nothing, I'd accept it was in my head. If I did see something, I'd have proof. For the first 15 minutes, I felt tense, my back stiff and my hands clammy. The street outside was still active, so I heard engines, horns, and people talking in the distance. Sometimes headlights would flash across the window, casting moving shadows on the walls. I tried to stay calm and differentiate those normal shadows from anything out of the ordinary. After half an hour, I was feeling a little silly. I scrolled through a news app on my phone, occasionally glancing up. Then it happened. The living room seemed to dim for a split second, and I saw that same dark shape cross from one side of the window to the other. It was slow this time, like it was gliding just above the floor. My throat tightened, and my heart hammered. I could hear my pulse in my ears. I stayed completely still, holding my phone. The shadow moved toward the corner, then vanished. I realized I'd captured it on video. My phone was still recording. I didn't know if the camera would pick up the darkness against the dimly lit background, but I hoped. My immediate reaction was to jump up and back away, but I forced myself to stand up and move toward the corner where it disappeared. My legs felt like they were made of lead. I stood there, arm outstretched, pointing the phone at the corner. My breathing was shallow. I felt a slight chill in the air, but I couldn't tell if that was real or just my imagination. I reached over and flicked on the overhead light. The brightness filled the room and everything looked normal. My couch, the coffee table, the lamp, the old hardwood floor. No sign of anything unusual. My chest was pounding. I shut off the video and immediately played it back. The screen showed me sitting on the couch, then a sudden dark area near the window. It was faint, but it was there. It moved across the frame, forming a vague, human-like outline, then vanished. I had to replay it 3 times to be sure it wasn't some shadow from outside. It didn't match the pattern of passing headlights or any normal reflection I'd seen before. That was the turning point. I realized there was something in that apartment beyond my control. The caretaker hinted at a tragedy, but I never found out the exact details. My gut told me that whatever happened had left a mark in that space. I tried to live with it for a while longer, but it wore me down. I felt drained and uneasy, like I was constantly waiting for the next sighting. I never saw the shape do anything other than drift across the room. It didn't speak, didn't try to interact. It was just there, showing up in the late hours and vanishing as quickly as it came. But the effect on me was overwhelming. My sleep was terrible and I couldn't relax even during the day. I put up with it for a couple of months, telling myself I was imagining things or that it would go away if I ignored it. It never did. Eventually, I started looking for another place. I felt guilty about leaving because, aside from that one issue, the apartment was actually a decent fit. But I couldn't keep living with that tension. I gave my notice and started packing my boxes. On my last night in that apartment, I stayed in a hotel because I couldn't handle the idea of another late-night encounter. I left a note for the next tenant, just letting them know the building is old and sometimes you see strange things. I didn't go into specifics. I still think about that shape sometimes. I remember the heavy feeling in my chest, the chills, and the moment of confusion when I first saw it cross my living room. It wasn't something I can explain, but I know it was real enough to push me out of a place I thought would be my home. I haven't been back to that building since. Part of me wonders if the new tenant has seen anything. Part of me hopes it all stopped after I left, but I doubt it. Something about that corner of the living room never felt unoccupied. I still have that short video clip saved on my phone. I watch it once in a while, just to remind myself that I didn't dream it. And every time I see that faint shape gliding across the screen, I feel my stomach twist, the way it did that very first night. I'll never forget the moment I realized our quiet house in the countryside wasn't as safe as I thought. It was late, and I was in the kitchen with a mug of coffee in my hand. My friend was in his bedroom, which was at the far end of the hallway. He had mentioned strange things in that room before, but I never took it seriously. That night changed my perspective on everything. My name is Daniel. I moved in with my friend Lucas about 6 months ago. We rented a small place in a rural area surrounded by old trees, thick bushes, and a few narrow dirt paths that led to other properties. It was quiet most of the time. I liked the calm. It was a simple house with 2 bedrooms, a living room, a tiny bathroom, and a small kitchen that barely fit 2 people at once. The rent was cheap and it felt peaceful during the day. At night, it was a different story. Lucas often told me he heard noises in his room. He said he heard knocking at the window and scratching along the wall. I told him maybe it was just branches or the wind. He insisted it sounded more deliberate than that. He also said he sometimes felt a weird presence. I shrugged it off. I wanted to believe it was just old house noises or normal wildlife outside. We were in the countryside, so I figured raccoons, stray cats, or something else might be lurking around. On the night everything started, I was leaning against the kitchen counter. It must have been around midnight. I was half asleep, and the only sound I heard was the drip of the faucet. I took a sip of coffee when Lucas screamed. It wasn't a small yelp. It was a full-blown shout for help. I nearly dropped my mug. I ran down the hallway to his bedroom. It felt like my heart was going to jump out of my chest. The house was dark except for the weak glow from a small lamp in his room. He stood in the middle of the floor, pointing at the window. I followed his gaze and saw a shadow outside. It looked like the shape of a person, but I couldn't make out any details. It was just a dark outline against the pale moonlight. I stayed still for a second. My mind raced through possibilities. Maybe it was a neighbor, maybe a burglar. Lucas whispered that the shadow had been standing there for a while, staring at him. I believed him because he looked terrified. I grabbed a flashlight from a table near the door. Lucas and I ran outside. The air was cold, and the grass felt damp under my feet. We went around to his window, but there was nobody. The ground was empty. No sign of footprints, nothing. All I heard was the wind moving the branches above us. There was no rustling like someone running away. Everything felt too still. We checked around the house. We scanned the area with the flashlight. We found nothing. I was uneasy. Lucas's face was pale, and he kept rubbing his arms like he was cold, even though it wasn't freezing out there. We went back in. We locked every door and window. My heart was still pounding, but after a while, we both calmed down. Lucas tried to explain that he saw a clear silhouette of someone right by the glass. I didn't doubt him anymore because I saw it too, even if it was for just a moment. I told him I'd stay up a little longer in the living room, just in case. He went to bed, and I sat on the couch, trying to keep my eyes open. Eventually, I dozed off. The next day, things seemed normal. Lucas and I talked about what happened. We decided it might have been a prowler. We agreed to be more careful. I even considered calling the local authorities, but I hesitated because I had no evidence of an actual break-in. We just saw a shape. In the daylight, it felt less important. Our daily routine stayed the same. We both worked small jobs nearby, so we left in the morning and got back in the late afternoon. The day passed without any unusual events, and I almost forgot about the scare. But the night came, and strange things started happening again. I was in my room, reading a magazine, when I heard a faint whisper near the window. At first I thought I was imagining it. I turned off my light and listened. I heard a soft, breathy sound right outside. My stomach clenched. I felt a tingling in my arms. I stood up and moved closer to the window. The whispering stopped. I didn't see anything outside. I looked through the glass. All I saw was the outline of trees and the faint glow of the moon. My mouth felt dry, and I noticed my hands were shaking a little. I forced myself to breathe slowly, then went to Lucas's room. I asked if he heard anything. He said he heard whispering too, but didn't want to check because he was afraid. We decided to walk around the house together again. We grabbed flashlights and went outside. It was quiet, no wind, no animal sounds, nothing. We circled the entire property. We looked under the raised parts of the house, behind trees, and even shone the lights up into the branches. We saw no one. We heard no footsteps. We didn't find any footprints. It felt like we were alone, but we both sensed we were being watched. My skin prickled the entire time. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about the whispering. It didn't sound like wind or leaves rustling. It sounded too close to the window, and it felt directed at me. The next few days were tense. During daylight, everything was fine, but as soon as the sun went down, I felt my chest tighten. Lucas looked drained. He had bags under his eyes. He complained about feeling watched in his own room. He kept his curtains closed, but he told me he sometimes heard faint taps on the glass. They never lasted long. Whenever he got up to check, there was nothing. One evening, around 9, Lucas and I were in the living room watching a local channel on our small TV. The reception was bad. The image flickered. Then we heard a scratching sound on the outside wall. It moved along the side of the house. I muted the TV, and we listened. It was a slow, scraping noise that made my hair stand on end. I signaled for Lucas to stay quiet. We sat there, frozen, as the sound traveled from the living room window to the area near the back door. I got up and grabbed a heavy flashlight. I signaled for Lucas to stay behind me. When I opened the back door, the scratching sound stopped. The yard was dark, and I couldn't see beyond a few feet. I shone the flashlight around, but all I saw were the trunks of the trees and the tall grass. No movement. We stepped onto the back porch. The boards creaked under our feet. My heart pounded so hard it was all I heard in my ears. We stood there for a minute. No more scratching. We walked around the house one more time. Same result. No footprints, no tracks, no broken branches. Everything was still. The only thing I noticed was that the silence felt heavier than usual. I felt uneasy, like my body knew something was wrong even though I couldn't see anything. Over the next few nights, the pattern repeated. Whispers near the windows, scratching on the walls, and that sense of being watched. Lucas started sleeping with a baseball bat by his bed. I kept a kitchen knife in my nightstand, just in case. We started feeling jumpy at small sounds, even the fridge humming. My nerves were shot. I woke up in the middle of the night sweating and checking the windows. I knew I had to figure out what was going on, but I didn't know where to start. I tried talking to a neighbor who lived about half a mile down the road. He was an older man who had been there for years. He said he hadn't heard or seen anything strange near his property. He told me the woods could play tricks on people, especially at night. I wanted to believe him, but my gut told me we had a real threat outside our windows. Lucas and I installed makeshift barricades on the windows. We nailed some extra wooden boards to form a kind of shutter. It wasn't pretty, but we hoped it would discourage whoever or whatever was creeping around. That night I felt a little better, but only until the noises started again. The whispering seemed to move around, starting at Lucas's bedroom window, then traveling to mine, then around to the living room. It was slow and deliberate. I kept my flashlight in one hand and my phone in the other, ready to call the police if I actually saw someone. But I never did. We were on edge all the time. I noticed that during the day, there were a few small signs that someone had been in our yard. Sometimes I saw broken twigs or flattened patches of grass near the windows. One afternoon, I found a small piece of torn cloth stuck to a nail on the side of the house. It looked like part of a dark shirt or jacket. That made me nervous. It meant we weren't imagining this. Someone was definitely outside at night. Lucas wanted to call the police, but I insisted we gather more proof. I didn't want to risk the local deputies blowing us off or telling us to install better lighting and nothing else. On the 6th night after we first saw that shadow, everything reached a new level of tension. We were both in the living room around midnight, talking in low voices. Lucas was scared and wanted to leave the house. I told him we didn't have anywhere else to go on short notice. We heard a loud thump on the wall behind the couch. It sounded like someone had thrown a rock. I jumped up, grabbed the flashlight, and rushed outside through the front door. Lucas followed right behind me. We ran to the side of the house, shining the light around. I saw movement near the bushes, a quick blur. It looked like a person crouching. I shouted, "Hey!" But they darted behind a tree. We ran after them. I heard heavy breathing, but I wasn't sure if it was mine or Lucas's. We reached the tree, shone the light around, but we didn't see anyone. The bushes were still. The area was silent again. I stood there, trying not to panic. Lucas kept swinging his flashlight around, trying to catch some sign of movement. Nothing. I felt my skin tingling from the adrenaline. We eventually gave up and went inside. We locked up again, double-checking every door. That night I barely slept. I kept waiting for more noises. I was ready to confront whoever was out there. My eyes stung from lack of sleep and my muscles were tense. The next day I told Lucas we needed to call the police. It was obvious someone was harassing us. They came that afternoon. 2 officers walked around our property. We showed them the marks we found, the piece of cloth, and told them about the whispering. They noted everything but said they couldn't do much without a real suspect or better evidence. They suggested installing cameras or getting a dog. We didn't have the money for cameras, and we weren't prepared to adopt a dog without a fence or a plan. The nights continued in the same pattern. Scratching, whispering, movement outside. Lucas started spending more nights in my room. We pushed the 2 single mattresses onto the floor in the living room sometimes, just so we weren't alone. We felt safer sleeping in the same space, but it still didn't solve the problem. A few times I tried to surprise whoever it was by running out at random times during the night. I'd sprint to the back door, fling it open, and shine the flashlight around. I never caught the person. We considered that maybe it was more than one person. We had no proof, though. We never saw any footprints suggesting multiple people. We only saw the occasional flattened grass or broken twig. I remember one night around 3 in the morning, I woke up to a tapping sound at the window near the couch. I sat up, and Lucas was already awake, staring at the window. The tapping was rhythmic, like someone gently hitting the glass with a finger. My throat felt dry and my heart raced. I pointed the flashlight at the window, but the closed shutters blocked my view. The tapping stopped. We waited, silent, for something else to happen. Nothing did. Eventually, we drifted back to an uneasy sleep. That was how our nights went for almost 2 weeks. We never found out exactly who was out there or what they wanted. The whispering, the scratching, the tapping, all of it made me jump at every little sound. Lucas and I talked about moving. We started saving money to find a new place. We felt trapped, but we couldn't break the lease easily. We were worried about losing our deposit and not having enough for another place. So we stuck it out, feeling that uneasy presence watching us from the trees. I still remember the tension in my chest every night. I remember the adrenaline surging through my arms whenever I heard a noise. I remember holding the flashlight so tight my knuckles turned white. And I remember Lucas standing beside me, breathing fast, scanning the yard with his own beam of light. We never caught whoever was out there, but we felt them. That feeling of being observed became unbearable. It was like the walls were closing in every time the sun went down. We never had a final confrontation. We just continued living with that fear until we had enough money to leave. As far as I know, whatever was out there kept prowling around. Sometimes, late at night, I still think about that shadow by the window and those whispers that seemed to circle the house. I think about the cold sweat on my forehead when I realized we weren't alone in that remote place. That house taught me a lesson. Sometimes the worst feeling is not seeing the threat clearly. It's sensing it in the silence, in the corner of your eye, or right outside your window when you're too scared to look. Lucas and I left as soon as we could. We never went back. I still wonder if something still lingers around that property at night, looking for another person to scare. but I'll never go there again to find out. I stood at the base of the attic stairs with my stomach tight and my palms damp. My father-in-law had asked me to check for leaks up there. It sounded easy at first. I expected to see a few old boxes, some dusty shelves, maybe a cracked tile on the roof. I never imagined I'd feel the temperature drop the second I stuck my head inside that cramped space. I never expected to hear something moving when no one else was around. Now I can't shake the feeling that there's something up there. I'm not talking about a stray animal or a loose board. I'm talking about a presence I can't explain. They noticed some discoloration on the ceiling in the hallway. My mother-in-law spotted those stains a couple of weeks ago. She worried about a leak because the roof is older than I am. My father-in-law tried to check on his own, but his knee has been giving him trouble, so he asked me to handle it. I said yes right away. I don't mind helping them out. They've always been good to me, and I wanted to show I appreciated that. Plus, climbing a set of stairs and shining a flashlight around didn't seem like a big deal. I used to handle small jobs in my own parents' house, so I thought I knew what to expect. On the day I went up, I felt relaxed at first. The house smelled like coffee and cleaning products, and the sun was shining through the windows. My mother-in-law gave me a flashlight and pointed to the narrow door in the hallway. The door led to a short flight of wooden steps. Everything looked normal. The paint on the door was chipped and the metal latch felt a bit loose, but that's nothing unusual in a house this old. I opened the door, flicked on the flashlight, and started to climb. When I reached the top, I noticed a heavy, cold draft. It didn't make sense. It was warm outside, and the rest of the house felt comfortable. Up there, the air felt stale, and I got goosebumps on my arms. The first thing I did was check around the small attic window to see if it was cracked or open. It wasn't. I ran my hand along the frame. It felt solid. No air leaks that I could detect. I shined the flashlight around and saw stacks of old chairs, some broken lamps, a couple of trunks, and a wide assortment of worn-out boxes. Dust was everywhere, swirling around in the beam of my light. The rafters looked okay on my first pass. I didn't see water dripping, but I wanted to be thorough. I crouched down near a corner where the ceiling below had the most noticeable stain. I pushed aside a small chest and some rolled-up rugs. My knees pressed against the rough floorboards. I brushed away cobwebs and tried to see if there was any moisture. Nothing seemed wet. I ran my fingers along a support beam. It was dry. I felt relieved for a moment. Then I heard something scrape across the floor on the opposite side of the attic. It was a slow, dragging sound like someone sliding a piece of furniture. My heart pounded. I froze for a second, holding my breath. I listened hard, but I didn't hear it again right away. I told myself it might be my imagination. Maybe the wind was shifting something, or the house was settling. But it felt different, like something deliberate. I decided to check it out, partly because I needed to be sure there wasn't a leak on that side of the roof, and partly because I wanted to calm my nerves. I shined the flashlight along the floor, stepping carefully so I wouldn't trip. The attic boards creaked under my weight, and the dust rose in small clouds. As I got closer to the far side, I noticed several heavy pieces of furniture, a tall wardrobe, an old desk, and a pair of large wooden chairs. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust. I examined the floor around them. I didn't see any fresh scrape marks, and I didn't see any sign that something had just moved. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I'd heard something from outside. Maybe a tree branch was brushing against the roof. I stood there for a moment, shining the flashlight around, checking every corner. My pulse was slowing down a bit. I noticed the cold feeling again. My nose felt chilly and my ears felt numb, like I was outside on a cold day. The air smelled stale, like old cardboard and mildew. I coughed once or twice when the dust got into my throat. I went back to the center of the attic to continue my roof inspection. I aimed the flashlight up at the wooden beams. Everything looked intact. No cracks, no holes, no visible light shining through. I felt along a few areas where the boards joined, just to see if any moisture had seeped in. It all seemed fine. I was about to take one more pass when I heard a sudden thud from beneath the floor. It sounded like someone knocking from the other side of the boards, right below my feet. It was loud and strong, and it startled me enough that I nearly dropped the flashlight. My chest tightened and I felt my heart rate spike again. For a second, I didn't move. I kept the flashlight aimed at the floor, even though that made no sense. Then I heard another knock, harder this time. It felt like the wood vibrated under my shoes. I whispered, "Hello?" I'm not even sure why I said that. It's not like I expected an answer, but I needed to do something. I waited, but there was no response. I stared at the floor for a few more seconds, trying to figure out if maybe my father-in-law was below me, testing something or moving a piece of furniture in the room underneath. But he wasn't. I knew he was in the living room when I came upstairs. Besides, the way those knocks sounded, it felt directed at me like a warning. My breathing became shallow. My thoughts raced. I tried to think logically. This is just an old house. Maybe there's a vent or a pipe knocking around. Old pipes can bang sometimes, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it came from something else. My skin felt clammy. I wiped my forehead with the back of my hand, leaving a streak of dust there. I heard another slow, dragging sound off to my left. It was the same noise as before. I swung the flashlight in that direction, hoping to see a box shifting or a piece of cloth sliding off a trunk. Nothing. The sound stopped as soon as I pointed the light. I took a step back. I stepped on a loose board, and it groaned under my weight. I almost jumped out of my skin. I wanted to get out of there, but I also felt this urge to make sure everything was okay. I forced myself to stay a bit longer. I walked toward the area where I heard the dragging sound. The dust felt thick in the air, and I could taste it on my lips. I leaned over a few old chairs, making sure no animals were underneath. I looked inside a tall wardrobe. It was empty except for a moth-eaten coat on a bent hanger. The stench of mothballs hit me. I checked under a small table covered in stacked newspapers. I found nothing except a few spiders. Then I heard that heavy knock again, directly under my feet. My chest went cold. This time I didn't call out, I just froze. The knock came 3 times in quick succession. Bam, bam, bam. It echoed through the wood. My heart thudded so hard I could feel it in my temples. I decided I'd had enough. I'm not a trained professional in anything supernatural or weird. I was just there to check a leak. If there was something else going on, it wasn't in my job description. I backed away from that spot, trying not to make any more noise. It's silly, I know, but I didn't want to draw attention to myself, whatever that means. My flashlight flickered for a second, so I smacked it with my palm. It stayed on, but it gave me a fresh jolt of panic. I turned around and practically jogged toward the stairs. My legs felt shaky and my shoulders were tense. As soon as I reached the top of the staircase, I shut off the flashlight and hurried down. I almost tripped on the last step because I was moving so fast. When I opened the attic door, my mother-in-law was standing in the hallway. She looked at my face and asked, "Are you okay? You look pale." I couldn't hide it. I was breathing heavily and I must have looked spooked. I told her I was fine, just a bit winded from the dust. She could tell something was off, but she didn't push me. She asked if I found the leak. I said I didn't see any water up there. I told her I didn't notice any holes in the roof. She nodded and said she would call a professional roofer to take a better look. That was the last time I went into that attic. Since then, every time we visit, I avoid that door. I don't even glance in its direction. If they ever need something stored up there, I make an excuse or say I'm busy. I know they're curious about why I'm so jumpy, but I haven't shared all the details with them. It's hard to explain without sounding ridiculous. I still remember those noises. I can't forget the scraping sound, or that deliberate knocking from beneath the floor. I remember the cold air that didn't match the weather outside. I've tried to come up with a logical explanation, but nothing fits. There's no basement under that part of the attic. The second floor is below it, and I've been in every room on that floor many times. I can't think of any place where someone could hide and knock on the ceiling, but I heard it with my own ears. The boards shook under my feet. My father-in-law mentioned that nobody had cleaned or organized the attic in decades. He said the furniture and boxes belonged to his parents. I asked if anyone else ever heard strange noises up there. He gave me a puzzled look and said no. My mother-in-law said she sometimes heard random creaks, but she assumed it was the house settling. She never went up there alone, though. She said she didn't like the smell and the dust. After that day, I started sleeping poorly whenever we stayed at their place. I'd hear little noises at night, a tap here or a creak there, and my mind would start racing. I'd sweat in bed, thinking about that cold air in the attic and the knocks that seemed aimed at me. My wife noticed I was on edge, but I told her I was stressed about work. I didn't want to bring her into this. She has enough on her plate. One afternoon, about a week after my incident in the attic, my father-in-law decided to have a roofer come by. I stayed at the house that day, but I refused to go upstairs with them. The roofer and my father-in-law climbed up the steps, and I waited downstairs with my mother-in-law. I sat in the living room tapping my foot. We heard them walking around up there for a good 20 minutes. Nothing strange happened while they were up. I didn't hear knocks or dragging sounds. Later, the roofer said the roof was old but intact, no major leaks. He recommended some patchwork around the chimney, but that was about it. My father-in-law seemed relieved. I was quietly uneasy. I kept wondering why nothing happened when they went up. Did I imagine everything? It didn't feel like my imagination. I still remember my heart pounding and my throat going dry. I don't know if something was messing with me or if I somehow triggered it. Sometimes I think it was a one-time event. Other times I think it's still up there waiting. The next time we visited, my mother-in-law made an offhand comment about how I don't like that attic. She said it with a little smile, as if it was just a harmless quirk of mine. I tried to laugh it off, but I felt a chill run through my body. She asked if I could help her bring down a box of old curtains from up there. I hesitated, then I lied and said my back was bothering me. My father-in-law offered to do it, and I let him. I felt a bit guilty, but I refused to set foot on that stairway again. I don't know what's up in that attic. I only know that I heard those knocks, and they weren't a house settling or a pipe rattling. They were strong and rhythmic, almost as if someone was standing right below me, pounding a fist against the floor. I can still feel the vibration in my legs when I think about it. I remember the scraping, the way it sounded like heavy furniture moving, but nothing was out of place. When I close my eyes, I see that dusty furniture and the dark corners where the flashlight didn't reach. I won't pretend to understand it. I won't say it was a ghost or a spirit. I just know I felt something unnatural that day. That attic wasn't empty. It had more than just old lamps and trunks. There was a presence, and it wanted me to know it was there. It's the only time in my life I've felt something like that. I don't consider myself superstitious, but I trust my own senses. What I saw and heard was real, and it scared me more than I'd like to admit. That's why I stay away. I don't even argue about it. If anyone asks, I say I'm not comfortable going up there, and that's the end of it. Sometimes I see my father-in-law look at me with concern. He probably thinks I had some kind of panic attack or that I'm claustrophobic. I don't argue or try to correct him. It's easier to let them think that. Even now, whenever I step into that hallway and see that attic door, my chest tightens. I remember the dusty smell, the cold air, the sudden knocks. My mind replays the scene, and I can't help but feel that whatever is up there is waiting for me to come back. But I won't. If they want someone to check on that attic again, they'll have to find another volunteer. I'm done. I might help fix leaky faucets or replace light bulbs, but I'm never going up those stairs again. And whenever I hear a strange noise at their place, I keep my mouth shut. I act like I didn't hear a thing, because I don't want to invite that presence back into my thoughts. I'd rather stay out of that space entirely. That's the truth about what happened. I don't have a dramatic conclusion or a neat explanation. All I can do is tell you what I experienced. And that experience was enough to keep me away for good. If there's something hidden in that attic, let it stay there. I have no interest in finding out what it is. I just know I felt its cold presence, heard its pounding, and sensed its intention to scare me off. It succeeded. I'm gone, and I'm not going back. And I still get a tight feeling in my stomach every time I remember that call from the hospital. It was almost 3 in the morning when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I had been dozing off, but I jumped up the second I saw the hospital's number on the screen. My aunt was there for a high-risk surgery, and the nurse on the other end said her condition had gotten worse. She told me to hurry if I wanted to see my aunt. I didn't think twice. I threw on some jeans, grabbed my keys, and drove to the hospital as fast as I could. When I walked into the lobby, the main lights were dim. The receptionist looked half asleep. There was a faint smell of bleach in the air. The hallway stretched out in front of me with a row of flickering fluorescent lights. A cleaning cart stood near the elevators. I noticed the hush in the place right away. At that hour, I usually saw a few nurses or maybe another relative in the waiting areas, but that night, everything seemed empty. The only sound was the squeaking of my shoes on the polished floor. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the 4th floor where my aunt's room was. My mind was spinning with worry about her. I was also remembering the stories one of the night shift nurses liked to share. He was always talking about strange things people saw on certain floors at odd hours. Normally, I just let those stories slide. Hospitals can be unsettling at night, and I figured he liked to scare whoever was around to pass the time. But tonight, I felt every hair on my arm stand up as the elevator doors closed. The overhead light in the elevator flickered once, and I felt a little jolt of adrenaline in my chest. The elevator opened with a ding, and I stepped out into another quiet hallway. I smelled coffee from the small staff station to my left. Across from that, there was a series of patient rooms, all with the doors partially shut. My aunt's room was at the end of that hall, next to a window that faced the parking lot. I could see a dim glow from the street lamps outside. As I started walking toward her room, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. At first I thought it was a reflection on the window, but then I looked more carefully and realized it was a figure at the far end of the corridor, near the intersection that led to the surgical wing. I stopped moving for a second. My hand was gripping my phone so hard it hurt. The figure looked like a woman in a hospital gown standing with her back turned to me. The gown was that pale blue color, the kind with a simple pattern on it. Her hair looked a bit messy and her skin seemed almost too light. I wanted to call out, but my throat felt tight. Instead, I took a step forward, trying to see if maybe it was just a patient who was up and walking around. That happens sometimes, but as soon as I blinked, she was gone. The hallway was empty again. I felt my heart pounding in my ears. I thought maybe I was just tired or imagining things. It was 3 in the morning, and my head was full of worries about my aunt. I kept walking, but my legs felt a little shaky. I glanced back a few times, but the corridor stayed empty. When I reached my aunt's room, a nurse was there checking her vitals. My aunt was asleep or unconscious. I couldn't really tell. The machine next to her bed beeped in a slow, steady rhythm. The nurse told me her blood pressure had dropped, and they were trying to stabilize her. I stood there for a moment, feeling useless. My aunt's face looked pale under the harsh overhead light. There were dark circles under her eyes. I took her hand, but she didn't move. The nurse left to get the doctor, and I stayed by the bed. I could hear the air conditioning vent humming. My aunt's chest rose and fell with each breath. I thought about that figure I saw in the hallway. I wanted to chalk it up to nerves, but something about it kept nagging at me. Her shape, the way her outline flickered for a split second, none of it felt normal. I realized I was sweating a bit, even though the room felt cold. A few minutes later, the nurse came back with the doctor. He checked my aunt's condition and gave me a quick update. He said she was stable for the moment, but they would keep a close watch on her through the night. I nodded and thanked him. Then they left, and I was alone with my aunt again. I pulled a chair close to her bed and tried to get comfortable. I sent a quick message to my mother, letting her know I was at the hospital and would update her soon. Then I just sat there, staring at the monitors, listening to the steady beeping. Every once in a while, I thought I heard footsteps in the hallway, but when I looked, no one was there. After about half an hour, I decided to step out and get some water from the dispenser near the nurse's station. My throat felt dry, and I also wanted to see if the nurse I knew, the one who told ghost stories, was around. Sure enough, I spotted him leaning against the counter, typing something on a computer. He gave me a polite nod when he saw me. He asked me how my aunt was doing, and I told him she was still in the same condition. Then, without waiting, I asked him about the stories he used to tell. I said, "Remember those things you mentioned about strange figures roaming the halls at night? Do people really see stuff, or is it just for fun?" He looked at me and paused. Then he closed the computer screen and turned to face me. He said he didn't know every detail, but he'd heard about a ghostly woman who sometimes appeared when patients were in critical shape. People described her as wearing a plain hospital gown with pale skin. Some folks swore she drifted across the floors in the early hours, almost like she was checking on patients. Others thought she was a warning or a sign that someone's health was about to worsen. He called her the Spectre. It was an old story passed around by night staff. I felt a chill run down my arms when he said that. I didn't mention that I might have seen her. I just nodded, trying to keep my expression neutral. He noticed my reaction, though, because he leaned in a bit and asked if something had happened. I told him I thought I saw someone at the end of the hallway, but I wasn't sure. He didn't laugh or act surprised. He just told me these sightings came and went. Some nights no one saw anything. Other nights, a random staff member or relative would mention a strange figure. He said he'd never seen it himself, but knew a few people who swore by it. I took a sip of my water and felt my mouth go dry again. I asked him straight out, "What does it mean if you do see it?" He gave a slight shrug and said some believe it's a sign of trouble or a kind of message. Others think it's just a restless spirit with no particular meaning. But he did say that most of these sightings happened on nights when someone was in a serious condition. I didn't know how to respond to that, so I just nodded and stood there thinking about it. I thanked him for his time and went back to my aunt's room. I noticed my hands were shaking a bit when I reached for the door handle. I told myself to calm down. All the talk about ghosts and apparitions might have been feeding my anxiety. Maybe I just saw some reflection or a shadow, but a part of me couldn't let it go. That image of the woman was clear in my head, even though it only lasted a moment. Inside the room, the light seemed harsher than before. I sat down, trying to block out any spooky thoughts, but the beeping of the machines felt louder. Every time the door creaked, I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to see someone or something standing there. Around 4 a.m, my aunt stirred for a moment. Her eyes opened slightly, and she mumbled something I couldn't make out. I leaned in and tried to see if she was in pain. She seemed disoriented. Then she drifted off again. I felt a wave of relief seeing her move at all. At least she wasn't completely unresponsive. I decided I needed a break from the room. The nurse said it was fine if I walked around the floor as long as I stayed close. I left my aunt's room and turned down the hallway where I'd first seen that figure. It was quiet, just a faint hum from the ceiling lights. I passed by a few doors with signs like diagnostic imaging and supply room. I reached the end of the corridor, where there was a window overlooking the empty parking lot. I stood there, staring at my reflection in the glass. My face looked tired. My eyes were bloodshot. Then I heard a light shuffle behind me. I spun around. Nothing. The hallway was empty, but I had this prickling feeling on my neck, like I was being watched. My heart was pounding. I took a slow breath and told myself to relax. Maybe it was just the air conditioning kicking on. I walked back toward the main corridor. The overhead lights flickered again, just once. Then everything looked normal. As I approached the nurse's station, I heard the nurse call my name. She said my aunt needed another assessment. A different doctor had just arrived. I hurried back to the room, and the doctor was checking my aunt's pulse and blood pressure. I saw the nurse adjusting the IV. The doctor said they were doing everything they could to help her recover from the surgery. I thanked them again, feeling a heavy weight in my chest. I stayed by my aunt's bedside, hoping she would open her eyes again. Time moved slowly. I tried to distract myself by reading some messages on my phone, but it was no use. I felt restless. After an hour or so, the doctor said they needed me to step out so they could run a few more tests. I waited in the hallway, pacing back and forth. I glanced at the empty chairs in the waiting area. A vending machine hummed in the corner, offering stale snacks and sugary drinks. I put some coins in and got a bag of crackers I didn't really want. I just needed something to do with my hands. That was when I thought I saw her again, just a quick flicker of movement near the corner of the corridor. I snapped my head in that direction, and there she was. A woman in a light hospital gown, standing impossibly still, her face extremely pale. Her features looked blurred in the low light, but I could see she had dark circles around her eyes. The corners of her lips looked almost gray. My stomach lurched. I felt cold sweat trickle down my forehead. I took a step forward, and she flickered out of sight. I heard my own breathing, fast and shallow. I felt my heart pounding so hard I thought my chest might explode. I stayed frozen for a few seconds, scanning the hallway for any sign of her. Nothing. No footsteps, no door opening or closing. I wanted to call the nurse over, but I felt silly. I kept thinking, am I hallucinating? I rubbed my eyes and stood there listening to the distant beep of machines. Finally, I forced myself to walk back to the nurse's station. I saw the night shift nurse with the ghost stories, and I pulled him aside. I said, I saw her again. He didn't look surprised. He just asked if I was okay, if I felt dizzy or needed to sit down. I told him I was fine, just a bit rattled. He said sometimes people spot that figure more than once, especially if a close relative is in bad shape. He said he couldn't explain why. He just knew the stories. I spent the rest of the night by my aunt's side. I was tense, my legs felt cramped, and my stomach wouldn't settle. Every small noise made me jump. At around 5 in the morning, the nurse brought me a cup of coffee, and I drank it even though it tasted burnt. I needed something warm to keep me grounded. I stayed alert, watching my aunt's breathing. She seemed calmer, like the medication was helping. A little after 6, the sky started to lighten outside the window. I saw the first hint of dawn, that grayish glow on the horizon. The day shift staff began to arrive. The hallway got a little busier. A couple of doctors walked past and a few more nurses took over. I felt a slight sense of relief that the night was over. The new doctor came in and said they would continue to monitor my aunt carefully through the day. He suggested I go home, rest, and come back later, but I stayed for another hour to be sure everything was stable. I didn't mention the figure to the day shift staff. I just told them I'd check back in the afternoon. On my way out, I passed the spot in the corridor where I saw that spectral woman. My stomach tightened, but the hallway was just a hallway in the daylight. Bright lights, tile floor, and a few staff members walking around with folders. No shadowy presence, no flickering outline of a patient in a gown. I left the hospital with my legs feeling like rubber. I drove home in silence, gripping the wheel, checking the rearview mirror whenever I stopped at a light. That morning, I sat in my living room, thinking about everything that had happened. I tried not to obsess over it, but it felt impossible to ignore. I knew what I saw. I knew the nurses' stories. The whole experience left me uneasy, as if the hospital at night had its own hidden layer that only some people catch a glimpse of. I went back later that afternoon and things looked normal again. Busy hallways, bright lights, staff talking to each other. My aunt was still in a delicate state, but she was hanging on, and the staff seemed more optimistic than the night before. Even now, I still remember the look of that woman's face, or maybe the lack of expression on it. It stays with me whenever I step into a hospital hallway late at night. I don't mention it much because most people either don't believe in such things or don't want to hear about it. But in that moment on that quiet floor, it felt like she was there. And that's something I can't forget. I still remember that late afternoon when I decided to explore the abandoned quarry. It was a place everyone around my old neighborhood avoided, but I couldn't stay away. Something about that crumbling terrain caught my attention. People told stories about injuries and strange incidents in that spot, but I never listened. I always wanted to see it for myself. I'm the kind of person who needs to check things out firsthand. Sometimes that helps me learn my limits, and sometimes it gets me in trouble. The quarry sat at the edge of town, surrounded by a few small houses and scattered bits of land that no one bothered to clean up. A narrow dirt road led there, but most folks never used it. You'd see tire tracks from teenagers who went there late at night, but they rarely stayed long. It was common to hear rumors about weird noises or accidents. Honestly, I never believed in curses or anything supernatural. I just thought the place was unstable, with rocks ready to collapse at any time. That day I felt restless at home, so I called my buddy to see if he wanted to explore. He agreed without thinking twice. We set off around 4 in the afternoon. The sun was still bright and the sky was completely clear. The air was hot and I felt sweat gathering on my forehead before we even got close. We walked along the dirt road, kicking little rocks out of our path. We joked around at first, talking about random stuff. My buddy mentioned how he had heard about some guy slipping on the loose gravel last year. Apparently that guy hurt his leg pretty bad. My friend said he thought the place was jinxed because every few months someone managed to get injured there. I just shrugged. My main concern was stepping carefully. I didn't want to twist an ankle or break anything. The closer we got, the more isolated it felt. No traffic sounds, no people yelling, no music in the distance. We heard only the wind blowing through the sparse vegetation. The entrance to the quarry was blocked off with some rusty fencing, but there were big holes in the chain link. We found one wide enough to squeeze through. That fence had probably been there for a decade or more. It looked pointless, considering how easily we slipped past it. Right after we got inside, my buddy turned to me and said he felt uneasy. I told him we'd be fine. I was confident, maybe a bit cocky. We walked deeper into the old site. A few large boulders sat off to one side and the ground was covered in dust and gravel. A steep slope lay ahead. In the distance, I could see the high walls of the old quarry, rising like a massive crater. Dirt tracks and tire prints crisscrossed the area, which suggested that some people still rode bikes or drove trucks around there. I felt an odd rush, like my heart was beating faster than normal. I was excited to see a place most folks tried to avoid. We walked carefully, but the footing was rough. Sharp rocks stuck out here and there. Some areas were damp, probably from old rainwater that pooled in the hollows. My buddy and I started up a slight incline just to get a better view from the top. At first, the climb wasn't too bad, but about halfway up, he lost his balance. I heard a small crack as his foot landed on a loose rock and he yelped in pain. It wasn't a scream, just a sudden noise that told me something was wrong. I rushed over and saw him sitting on the ground holding his ankle. He was wincing and breathing heavily, so I asked if he could stand. He tried to put weight on it, but I could see it hurt him. His ankle started to swell a bit and he said it felt tender. I suggested we get out of there and go home. He agreed, but he also knew how stubborn I was. He looked up at me and said, "Dude, I'm heading back, but I know you're not coming with me, right?" I shrugged and admitted I wanted to stay. I told him I'd be fine on my own, but I'd walk him to the fence first. We slowly made our way back down. I stayed close in case he needed support. Once we reached the fence, I helped him through the gap. He managed to limp toward the main road. He said he'd text me when he got home, just so I knew he was okay. I watched him for a moment, then turned around. I felt a surge of adrenaline, like I was about to do something I wasn't supposed to. The quarry was quiet again, except for a faint rustling of leaves. I walked back the same path we had taken. My heart was pounding, and I noticed my palms were sweaty. I took a few deep breaths. The climb was waiting for me again, and this time I'd have to do it without any backup. That kind of challenge never scared me in the past, but something about being alone in that place made me more alert than usual. I reached the incline where my buddy had slipped. Small rocks shifted under my feet. I tested them before putting my full weight down. After a few steps, I realized I needed to find a better route. To the right, there was a steep embankment covered in dirt. Small shrubs and patches of grass poked through. If I got a good grip, I could use them to pull myself up. I decided to go for it. I moved slowly, focusing on one handhold at a time. My shoes slid once or twice, sending tiny stones tumbling down behind me. I kept moving. At one point, I grabbed a piece of root sticking out of the dirt. It felt sturdy, so I shifted my weight. Then I pushed off with my right foot, trying to find a better spot for my left foot. I felt my left foot land on something that seemed stable, but as soon as I pressed down, the support crumbled. My legs slid out from under me, and my chest lurched forward. For a split second, I thought I was done for. There was nothing beneath me but a drop of several feet. My arms flailed. Dirt rained down, and I felt a rush of air on my face. My body tensed up. My heart pounded so hard, it was all I could hear. Right then, I felt a strong pressure on my back. It was like a firm hand pushing my spine, right between my shoulder blades. It shoved me forward just enough for my foot to catch another patch of dirt that didn't give way. My left foot landed, and I stabilized myself. I gasped, trembling, with a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. For a second, I just froze there, trying to catch my breath. That pressure on my back was unmistakable. It felt like a person had pushed me. The spot on my back was warm, and my skin tingled where it touched me. As soon as I realized what happened, I whipped my head around. I scanned the area, but I saw nothing. There was no one behind me. No movement, no shadow of a person. There was only the quiet slope, a few clumps of grass and scattered stones. My heart rate shot up even more. I got goosebumps on my arms. My chest felt tight. I looked around again, hoping I'd see a hiker or an animal that might have bumped me. But there was nobody there. The wind wasn't even blowing that strongly. I felt kind of dizzy, like I couldn't trust my own senses. I pressed my hand to the spot on my back. It still felt warm, and I noticed my hand was shaking. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a rock had fallen in just the right way and knocked me forward, but that didn't make sense. The pressure was too precise. It felt exactly like a hand. I took a moment to calm down. My breathing was rapid, and I could feel my pulse racing. I glanced down the slope. I had almost tumbled down. It was a rough drop, full of rocks that looked sharp. If I had fallen, I could have been seriously hurt. My mind spun with questions I couldn't answer. I decided to keep going because climbing back down that slope felt more dangerous than going up. I clutched onto the sturdier clumps of grass and used the edge of a small boulder as leverage. I pulled myself up inch by inch until I reached a flatter area. Once I stood on level ground, I paused and looked around. The top of the quarry offered a wide view of the entire expanse. The wind blew dirt across the open area, creating a kind of low haze. Everything was still except for that shifting dust. I walked around the edges, careful to avoid any sudden drop-offs. Every few steps, I looked over my shoulder. I felt like I wasn't alone, even though I couldn't see anyone. My heart was still beating hard, and my legs felt unsteady. I didn't want to stay there any longer than necessary. I wasn't enjoying the exploration anymore. I just wanted to confirm there was truly no one else. So I walked to the far side, checked around some boulders, peeked behind a rusted piece of metal that might have been part of old equipment. There was nothing but rubble and weeds. I stood there, panting quietly, and realized my shirt was soaked in sweat. My mouth felt dry. I wanted to believe everything that happened was just a freak accident, but deep down I knew I had felt a hand on my back. It hadn't been a gentle breeze or a sliding rock. It was a push, firm and undeniable. I started to feel a twinge of panic, so I decided it was time to leave. I wiped my forehead with the back of my hand and tried to steady my breathing. The place was silent, except for my footsteps. The route down was on the other side, where there was a gentler slope. I took it slow, keeping my center of gravity low. I placed each foot deliberately, testing the ground before stepping. As I made my way down, I kept glancing around, half expecting to see a face or a figure. My stomach was in knots, and my muscles felt tense. I hated that feeling of not having a logical explanation. I usually trust what I see and feel, but this time, my senses were in conflict with my brain. About halfway down, the wind picked up. Dirt particles hit my face, stinging my cheeks. I blinked and covered my eyes. Little pebbles rolled past my feet. I moved slower, leaning forward to keep my balance. My heart rate started to settle a bit, but I was still on edge. I listened for any sound that might hint at another person nearby. I heard nothing except my own breathing and the soft crunch of gravel under my shoes. Once I reached the bottom, I took a moment to look back up at the slope. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the rocks. It felt like the entire place was watching me, even though there was no one. I exhaled hard. My legs shook and my hands felt clammy. Then I turned away and headed for the fence. The walk back felt longer than before, like my footsteps dragged with each step. I kept replaying that moment in my head, my foot slipping, my body falling forward, and that push on my back. The fence came into view, its rusted edges and broken links looking more inviting than ever. I squeezed through the gap, careful not to snag my shirt. Once I was on the other side, I felt like I could breathe easier. I shook the dust off my pants and wiped the sweat off my brow. I didn't know how to explain what happened. I still don't. I knew I wasn't just imagining it. The feeling was too real. I pulled out my phone to see if my buddy had messaged me. He had sent a text saying he got home and wrapped his ankle. He asked if I was still alive. I replied that I was fine and said I'd explain everything later. I started walking back along the dirt road. I kept glancing over my shoulder at the quarry's entrance, half expecting to see someone standing there, but it was empty. The sun dipped lower, and I realized how quickly time had passed. As I made my way home, I felt every step in my legs. My calves were sore from that tense climb. My arms felt tired too, probably from gripping the rocks. My mind was the most tired part of me, though. I couldn't shake off the memory of that hand on my back. I tried to come up with a reasonable explanation, but all of them seemed far-fetched. I'm not a superstitious person. I never believed in ghosts or invisible forces, but that moment was impossible to ignore. When I finally got home, I dropped my stuff by the door and went straight to the bathroom to wash the dirt off. The water turning brown at my feet reminded me of how filthy that place was. My muscles ached, and I felt a dull pain in my shoulder blades. I ran my hand over my back, feeling the tension in my muscles, remembering that exact spot where I had been pushed. It lingered like a strange aftertaste. I dried off, got dressed, and collapsed onto my couch. My phone buzzed again. My buddy asked me if I found anything cool up there. I just replied, "Not exactly," and said I'd tell him later. I needed time to process everything. My apartment felt safe and familiar, but I couldn't relax. I kept thinking about the sensation of falling and then that sudden push. My heartbeat still felt uneven. I went to the kitchen and drank a large glass of water. My throat was scratchy from all the dust. I stared out the window, noticing the sun had almost set. The sky was turning a deep orange, and I felt grateful to be away from that quarry. Part of me wanted to go back and figure it out. Another part of me never wanted to set foot there again. I wondered if the stories about the place weren't just accidents. Maybe people felt something similar, or maybe they had experiences they never talked about. I sat down and tried to calm my nerves. My hands were steadier and my breathing was back to normal. I kept replaying the moment. I pictured the slope, the crumbly dirt, the sensation of losing my footing, and then that solid pressure that saved me from falling. It was so real. I even remembered the spot where my right knee scraped against the dirt, leaving a faint bruise. The bruise was there, but there was no logical sign of what pushed me. I guess some things just don't have a neat explanation. That day changed how I see certain places, especially ones people avoid. I'm not going to claim I was touched by a ghost or anything like that. I just know I felt a physical push. It wasn't a slip or a lucky bounce. It was deliberate and strong enough to stop me from tumbling into a nasty fall. That's the truth of what happened. I never told many people about it. My buddy only knows bits and pieces. He rolled his eyes when I mentioned something strange happened. He teased me about hallucinating from the heat or something. I laughed it off, but deep down, I know what I felt. People can believe what they want. After that day, I stayed away from the quarry. I didn't see a need to go back. The place always had a bad reputation, and now I had my own reasons to keep my distance. The memory still pops into my head sometimes, especially when I think about risk-taking. I still have a bold streak in me, but I'm more careful now. I check my footing. I weigh the risks. And I keep an open mind to the possibility that there might be things we can't explain easily. Even today, if I close my eyes, I can almost feel that push on my back. It was warm, strong, and precise. Nobody was there, but something touched me. I walked out of that quarry with a bruise on my knee and a whole new sense of caution. I can't say I'll ever understand it fully, but I'm sure I'll never forget it. The memory is too clear in my mind. It's not a comforting memory, but it's part of my experience now. And that's the whole story of what happened to me in that abandoned quarry. I still remember the moment I looked at those photos and felt my stomach drop. I wasn't expecting anything weird. My brother and I had just finished painting the storefront. We were both excited to show off the place on social media. We took a bunch of pictures from different angles. We wanted to highlight the vintage vibe of our new vinyl record shop in this old neighborhood, full of brick buildings and narrow sidewalks. But when I flipped through the images later, I saw something that made my throat tighten. In the reflection of the big front window, there was a clear outline of a woman. She had braids and wore clothing that looked decades out of date. She stood right behind me in the shot, staring straight at the camera. No one else was on the sidewalk at that time, and I knew that for a fact. It made no sense. My brother was still in the store, stocking shelves, when I realized what was in the photo. I walked over to him, held out my phone, and said, "Does this look normal to you?" His eyes locked on the reflection. He didn't speak for a few seconds. Then he just said, "We were alone outside. There wasn't anybody else there." I could see the color drain from his face. He tried to act calm, but he looked tense. He zoomed in on the screen, checking every detail. The figure was impossible to miss. It wasn't some blurry smudge. It was a sharp outline of a woman in old-fashioned clothes. She stood as if she was looking right at me. I felt a chill spread through my chest. I know my body reacted before my mind could process it. My heart started racing. My mouth was dry. I just stood there trying to figure out how something like that could happen. My brother locked the phone and gave it back. He said he wanted to keep moving and finish setting up the shop. I agreed, but neither of us could concentrate for the rest of the day. Every little sound made me jump. When the old radiator in the corner hissed, I jerked my head around. My brother did the same. We tried to joke about it, saying it was just some optical illusion. But we both knew there had been nobody else on that sidewalk. The next day, I got to the store around 10 in the morning. My brother was already inside. He had turned on some music to give the place a relaxed atmosphere. The store smelled like fresh paint and old vinyl sleeves. The mix of chemical and musty paper made me wrinkle my nose. I passed the front window, and I glanced at the glass, but I didn't see anything strange. I breathed a small sigh of relief, thinking maybe we'd just spooked ourselves. Customers started coming in around lunchtime, mostly curious neighbors who saw the new signage and wanted to browse. My brother and I stayed busy answering questions and organizing the racks. That was when a guy in his 50s pulled me aside. He said, "Hey, sorry to bother you, but I thought I saw someone standing in the back hallway. Is there an employee area back there?" I said, "No, that hallway just leads to our storage. Nobody should be there." He looked puzzled. He said he glanced over his shoulder and saw a figure. Then, when he turned fully around, the person was gone. He shrugged it off and left with a used jazz record under his arm. I felt my gut tighten again. The memory of that photograph came rushing back. By evening, I found myself avoiding the hallway. I didn't want to admit it, but I felt uneasy every time I got close. The hallway lights flickered sometimes, and the far end stayed dark. There was an old wooden door that opened to a smaller storeroom. We hadn't done much cleaning in there yet. The walls had peeling wallpaper, and the light bulb was missing its cover. It gave off a dim, yellow glow that made shadows dance on the walls. The door to the storeroom squeaked whenever we nudged it, so I kept it shut. My brother seemed on edge, too. Around closing time, I heard him call my name. His voice sounded strained. I walked over to the cash register and found him frozen in place, staring at the back corridor. I asked what happened, and he just pointed, whispering, "I swear I saw someone standing there. She was looking right at me." I felt my scalp prickle. I peeked down the hallway. It was empty. The single light bulb flickered. Nobody was there. That night, I couldn't sleep well. My mind replayed the image in the photograph. I tossed and turned, my body covered in sweat. Every noise from the street outside made me jump. I had a dream that I was back in the shop, alone with the lights off. I heard soft footsteps behind me. When I turned around, I saw a figure with braids, wearing clothes that didn't match any current fashion. She was standing there, motionless. Her eyes were locked on me. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. The next morning, I arrived at the store earlier than usual. The weather was cloudy and the sky looked gray. The old buildings on our block seemed more worn out than ever. I stepped into the shop, turned on the lights, and tried to focus on my tasks. I wanted to act normal, but my nerves were shot. Around noon, a young couple came in, looking for rock albums. I guided them to the right section. While they flipped through records, I heard the door chime ring. Another customer walked in, glanced around, and headed for the back. I didn't pay much attention until I heard a startled, "Oh!" from that area. I rushed over and found the customer standing in the corridor, checking around like they expected to find someone hiding. They asked if we had any employees in the storeroom. I said no. They frowned and said they had just seen someone slip around the corner. But there was nobody there. My brother and I exchanged uneasy looks. We started checking the storeroom regularly, just to make sure there weren't any squatters or intruders. We never found anyone. The corridor always looked the same. Dim light, peeling walls, that creaking door. But customers kept mentioning fleeting glimpses of a figure. Some described a woman with braided hair. Others just said, "someone." A few times I heard the door to the back storeroom creak on its own, like it was opening or closing. When I went to check, it was always shut tight. My skin crawled every time I walked down that hallway. One evening after closing, my brother suggested we spend some time in the back storeroom to see if we could catch something in the act. It sounded terrifying, but I agreed because I wanted answers. We locked the front door, turned off most of the lights, and sat on two old stools in the storeroom. The single light bulb hummed above us. The walls were stained and cracked. The floor was cold concrete. We didn't speak much. I could hear my own breathing, and I tried to keep it steady. After about half an hour, we heard soft footsteps in the hallway. They sounded light, almost like someone trying not to be heard. I felt an electric jolt through my body. My brother's eyes were wide. I whispered, "Hello?" No one answered. The footsteps stopped. We both stood up, my brother clenching his jaw. We stepped into the corridor, peering around. The flickering light made everything look jumpy. We saw nothing. Then the door behind us squeaked. We turned around. It swung an inch or two as if pushed. We both froze. I felt goosebumps all over my arms. He motioned for me to stay put. He tiptoed back into the storeroom and checked behind every box. Nobody was there. I felt my heart thundering. I just wanted to get out of there. But we stayed a bit longer just in case. Nothing else happened that night. We left feeling on edge and exhausted. The next few days were less eventful. We kept hearing from customers that they saw something in the back, but it never escalated beyond fleeting sightings. I noticed that whenever I passed the corridor alone, I felt this tightness in my chest. My mouth would go dry, and I'd quicken my pace. My brother started leaving a small lamp on in the hallway at all times, hoping it would make things less creepy. It didn't help much. The shadow still felt alive somehow, even though I knew that sounded ridiculous. One afternoon, a local historian came by the store. He was curious about our inventory of older records. He wore thick glasses and carried a worn notebook. While browsing, he casually mentioned that our building had some interesting past tenants. I didn't bring up the sightings, but I asked if he knew anything specific about the structure. He said it had been around since the early 1900s. It served different purposes over the decades, a tailor shop, a small antiques store, and, for a while, a photography studio. He didn't mention anything about tragedies, and I didn't ask. I wasn't in the mood to hear anything that might feed my anxiety. I felt my nerves rattling again. That evening, my brother and I tried to focus on normal tasks. We were rearranging a shelf near the front window. He was up on a small stepladder, and I was handing him records. At one point, I caught a glimpse of movement in the reflection of the front glass. My heartbeat spiked. It looked like a woman with braided hair was standing behind us near the jazz section. Her clothing still had that outdated style. She was looking in our direction. I spun around fast. Nobody was there. My brother saw me react and asked if I was okay. I felt a lump in my throat. I just told him I thought I saw something. He didn't question further. He knew exactly what was on my mind. I decided to try something. I grabbed my phone and started taking pictures of the shop interior, focusing on the back corridor. My brother and I checked the photos immediately. We didn't see anything unusual in those shots. But when I turned the phone camera toward the large front window from inside, I caught that shape again in the reflection. This time, it was harder to make out details, but the braided hair was unmistakable. I felt like my skin was buzzing. My brother let out a shaky breath and stepped away, muttering that he needed fresh air. I joined him outside, and we stood on the sidewalk, staring at our own storefront. Cars passed by. A few pedestrians strolled along. Everything seemed ordinary. We could see our reflection in the glass. No one else. That night, we decided to close early. Both of us felt too wound up to deal with customers. We locked up the shop and walked around the neighborhood. It was quiet except for the sound of distant traffic. The old street lamps buzzed. We ended up at a small diner, where we nursed cups of coffee and tried to act normal. We talked about sports, about anything but what was happening in our store. Eventually, we admitted we couldn't ignore it anymore. We felt uneasy staying in the shop after dark. We kept hearing from people about seeing that figure. We agreed to keep investigating but stay calm, because neither of us wanted to freak out in front of customers. When we reopened the next morning, I tried to set a reassuring tone. I greeted customers with a smile, asked them about their music tastes, and pointed them to different sections. My brother played upbeat rock on the store speakers to lighten the mood. Still, the tension hung in the air. I noticed a few customers glance toward the back corridor as if something drew their attention there. One guy asked me if we had an employee who wore vintage clothes and braided hair. I almost dropped the record I was holding. I forced a laugh and told him we didn't. He looked confused, then brushed it off and continued shopping. In the late afternoon, I decided to reorganize a few boxes of used records in the storeroom. I took a flashlight with me, just in case the overhead light decided to flicker. The air was stale back there. My footsteps echoed on the concrete floor. I tried not to think about the strange occurrences. I just focused on my task, picking through records to see which ones we could bring out to the front. After about 10 minutes, I heard a soft thump behind me. I stood up and turned around. The door was closed, but the handle looked like it moved. I swallowed hard and approached it. My heart was pounding. I opened the door quickly, shining my flashlight into the corridor. It was empty. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught a shape move by the front of the store. It was just a blur. It vanished as soon as I focused on it. I felt sweat break out on my forehead. My pulse raced. I whispered to myself that I was imagining things, but I didn't believe that. I walked back to the main area, trying to stay calm. My brother was at the register, but he noticed the expression on my face. I told him what happened, and he nodded grimly. We both felt drained. I looked at my watch. It was close to closing time again. The store was empty, so we shut off the main lights, locked up, and headed out. We talked in the car about what to do next. We both agreed that none of this felt threatening in a violent way. It was just unnerving to see someone who shouldn't be there. We didn't want to share the story publicly because we were worried it would scare customers away, or worse, turn the shop into some local haunted attraction. We just wanted to run our vinyl business in peace. Still, we couldn't ignore the fact that people kept seeing that figure. and now we had pictures that showed something in the reflection. Over the next few weeks, the sightings continued. Some people left the store anxious, asking if we had some performer in period clothing. We never gave a straight answer. We just shook our heads and mumbled that the building was old. My brother and I did our best to stay professional, but the tension wore us down. Some nights I'd walk to the front door, double-check that it was locked, and catch a glimpse of movement in the glass. My own reflection sometimes made me jump. Then I'd see nothing else there. Eventually, I stopped trying to take pictures. Seeing that figure in photographs made it too real. I felt less nervous if I convinced myself it was all in my head. My brother tried a similar strategy. We focused on selling records, chatting with music enthusiasts, and ignoring any mention of a presence in the store. But every once in a while, I'd sense someone standing behind me, and I'd spin around, heart racing. The corridor would be empty, but I'd feel that creeping sensation crawl up my spine. I never found a perfect explanation. The store is still open. The sightings haven't stopped entirely, but people seem to brush them off more easily now. They assume they're just seeing a reflection or catching a trick of the light. My brother and I know better, but we don't talk about it much. We just keep the lights on and try to focus on business. We still have that original photograph, and I can't bring myself to delete it. Every time I look at it, I get that same rush of cold fear in my chest. The reflection is unmistakable. It's a woman with braids, wearing clothes from another era, standing right there behind me in broad daylight. I wish I had a satisfying conclusion. All I have is a feeling that this presence belongs to the building somehow. Maybe it's tied to the old walls and floors that have seen so many decades pass by. I don't know. All I can do is keep going. We turn the sign to open every morning, greet our customers, and sell our records. And sometimes, late in the afternoon, a customer will mention seeing someone slip down the hallway. I just nod and say, "There's nobody back there." But deep down, I can't ignore that chill in my gut. I know they saw something. I saw it too. And I have a photo that proves it. I got used to weird schedules when I joined my college's theater group. Our rehearsals often stretched late into the evening, but I never felt uneasy in that old auditorium. I always thought the building was just another worn-out place on campus. Then I stayed there alone one night and everything changed. I still remember the shock in my chest and the tightness in my throat when I saw something I couldn't explain. I'm a senior now, and I've been involved in theater since my freshman year. We rehearsed in a dusty auditorium built in the 1950s. The seats were dull red, with stuffing poking out in some spots, and the flooring felt spongy in places because of old water damage. There was a stale smell, like mildew mixed with old paint. Some parts of the stage creaked when you walked over them. The overhead lights hummed with a low buzz that made it hard to concentrate sometimes. People said the electrical system was ancient. Still, we liked the space. It had a wide stage, enough room for our set pieces, and the acoustics were good. It always felt a bit run down, but it was our spot. One evening, our rehearsal dragged on later than usual. We were preparing for a student-written production that had complicated scenes. We had to block everything carefully, and that night, a few of my castmates kept messing up their lines. By the time we finished, it was almost midnight. The director told everyone to lock up the stage doors and secure all the entrances. He handed me the keys because he had to leave in a hurry. At first, I didn't mind. I'd locked up before, and I considered it a simple task. Flip off the stage lights, make sure the back door and side exits were locked, then shut the main doors on my way out. I noticed how quiet the auditorium became once everyone left. Usually there was a bunch of chatter or at least some scuffling around from crew members carrying props. That night, I heard my own footsteps echo across the stage. When I finished checking the backstage area, I walked down the side stairs toward the rows of seats. The overhead lights were off except for the single work light we kept on near the front. The rest of the place was dim. The seats in the back were almost lost in darkness. I made my way up the aisle. My shoes made a soft squeak on the old floor. I could hear my breathing in the silence. The musty smell felt heavier than usual, like the air was thick with dust. I glanced around to make sure I hadn't missed any stray jackets or backpacks. That's when I felt a cold rush on the back of my neck, like someone opened a door behind me. It made me stand still for a second. I turned around and saw nothing, just empty seats and the faint outline of the stage at the front. I thought maybe a draft came from somewhere. The building was old, so that made sense. But I felt a weird tension in my arms, like my muscles were ready to jerk if something moved. I forced a laugh out of my mouth, but it sounded awkward. I told myself I was tired and needed to hurry up so I could get some sleep. I took a few more steps toward the exit and then froze. There was someone sitting in the last row. I remember seeing the outline of a person's head and shoulders. The figure looked perfectly still, facing the stage. My first thought was that one of my castmates had stayed behind. Maybe they were sulking after a rough rehearsal or lost something, but I realized I couldn't hear any breathing or movement. Nothing. The figure was too rigid. I blinked a few times, trying to adjust my eyes. The shape didn't move at all. I felt my hands starting to sweat. My pulse pounded in my ears, but I tried to keep calm. I said, "Hey, you okay?" My voice cracked a bit. No response. The figure just sat there, head slightly tilted forward. I cleared my throat and tried again, louder. Still nothing. I took a step closer, feeling my knees tighten. My stomach started churning. There was a buzzing in my head, like I was half convinced I was imagining things. But that shape was there. I walked slowly down the row, my footsteps almost silent now. When I got close enough to see the details, the figure vanished. It didn't move. It didn't get up. It just wasn't there anymore. One second I was staring at a person, and the next second the seat was empty. I almost dropped the keys. My heart felt like it was hammering out of my chest. I stepped back so fast I knocked my elbow on the armrest of another seat. My breath got caught in my throat, and for a moment I had trouble seeing straight. I spun around, checking the aisles and the row behind me. Nobody was there. The space was silent except for my own panicked breathing. I left the auditorium as fast as I could. I didn't even bother with the main lights. I locked the doors with shaky hands and got out of there. While I walked across campus, I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting someone to be following me. I remember the cold sweat on my temples. My mouth felt dry, and every time I tried to swallow, my throat felt tight. The next day, I felt embarrassed about how freaked out I got. I told myself I must have been overtired. Maybe I saw a shadow or a weird reflection. But deep down, I knew what I saw had shape and detail. It wasn't just some strange lighting. It looked like a person. I didn't share this with my theater friends at first. I was worried they'd laugh or label me as someone who jumps at shadows. Over the next few weeks, I kept noticing small things that made me uneasy. One night, I heard faint footsteps in the aisle when everyone else was on stage. I poked my head out to look. Nobody was there, but the steps kept going, like shoes lightly scraping the floor. Another time, I went backstage to get a prop and heard a soft sigh coming from behind a stack of old flats. I checked, and it was empty. It wasn't my imagination. I know the difference between random building noises and a human sound. Eventually, one of the older guys in the group, Marcus, caught me rubbing my arms after hearing those footsteps. He asked why I looked so tense. I hesitated, but I told him about that night when I saw the figure. Instead of laughing, he nodded and said, "Yeah, a couple people mentioned something similar over the years. I heard it's connected to an accident a long time ago." He explained that in the 1960s, a student was involved in a serious incident in that auditorium. People spread stories that his presence never left. Some said they saw him sitting in the back row or heard him behind the curtains. Marcus never saw anything himself, but he believed the rumors were possible. I felt a strange relief that I wasn't the only one who had experienced something bizarre. I started hanging around after rehearsal with a few friends, hoping to see if it would happen again, but only when we were still in a group. We'd stay late, cleaning up or running lines, and I'd discreetly glance at the last row. Most nights I saw nothing. A few times I thought I saw movement, but it was just shadows cast by our work lights. The tension stayed in my shoulders, though. I felt on edge whenever we reached that midnight hour. The place got colder, Or maybe I just noticed it more. The old ventilation system never worked well, so it was easy to blame it on random drafts. One night, Marcus and I were the last to leave. We turned off most of the lights, but kept a small lamp on near the stage door so we could see our way out. We were talking about some upcoming campus event when we both heard a sharp click. It sounded like someone tapping on one of the folding seats. Marcus raised his eyebrows at me, and we both went silent. We listened. Another click, like a seat flipping up or down. We walked into the seating area, shining our phone flashlights around. In the third row, we saw a seat slowly return to its upright position, as if someone had just stood up. But there was no one there. Marcus whispered, "That's enough for me tonight," and we left. I tried to find out more about the accident from the 1960s. I asked a few professors who'd been around a while, but most said they had no idea. A reference librarian pulled some old campus articles for me. One small snippet mentioned an event in the auditorium but didn't give a lot of detail. It just said that a student was rehearsing alone one evening and got injured. He left the college soon after. That was it. No official records explained what happened to him afterward. Rumors filled the gaps. Some people said he never fully recovered and spent time in a long-term care facility. Others said he tried to come back but felt too uneasy in that auditorium. I had no way to confirm these stories, but it made me think about the figure I saw. If it was that student, maybe he just couldn't let go of that place. As the weeks passed, I started to accept that something odd was going on. I didn't feel threatened. It was more like a persistent reminder that we weren't alone in that old building. Rehearsals continued, and I did my best to focus on my performance. I stopped looking around so much whenever I heard a strange noise. I figured if it wanted to appear, it would. I wasn't going to waste my energy jumping at every creak. Then one Thursday, we wrapped up around 11 at night. Our director left with most of the cast, and I was stuck putting away the last few props. I couldn't shake this nervous feeling in the pit of my stomach. My hands trembled a little as I stuffed costumes into a big plastic bin. I felt like someone was behind me watching. I looked over my shoulder. Nobody was there. I turned back to the bin and the overhead light flickered. My eyes darted up, and for a split second, the entire stage area seemed darker. Then the light came back on. I swallowed hard and told myself to finish up fast. After I returned the props to the storage closet, I locked it and walked toward the main doors. The place was silent. I heard no traffic outside, probably because it was late and we were on the quiet side of campus. I switched off the remaining lights, leaving only a single bulb near the entrance. My heart was beating faster than usual. My palms were damp, and I kept wiping them on my pants. I looked back at the seats just to be sure I wasn't forgetting something. In the back row, I saw a distinct outline again. A person-shaped darkness sitting there. My eyes widened. I felt the blood rush to my face. I gripped the key ring so hard it dug into my palm. I stood there, not moving, trying to decide if I should say anything. My throat felt tight. I felt my heart pound in my temples. The figure turned its head slightly, like it was looking in my direction. I took one slow step forward, ignoring the dull ache in my legs. My stomach was in knots. I felt a chill run through my arms. Then it happened the same way as before. The figure vanished in an instant, leaving only empty space. I almost wanted to shout, but my voice wouldn't work. I stared at the seat for a few seconds, half expecting it to fill up again. It stayed empty. I let out a shaky breath and forced myself to walk to the doors. I locked them as calmly as I could, though my hands were trembling. Once I was outside, I breathed in the cool night air. My chest felt tight and my lips were dry. I told Marcus about it the next day. He nodded and said, "At least it's not trying to do anything to you. It's just there." That didn't really make me feel better, but he had a point. It never approached me. It never caused any real harm. It was just something that existed in the shadows, showing up when the place was quiet. A few more months went by, and I continued my normal schedule. I still got that uneasy feeling at times, but I learned to live with it. If I stayed late, I moved quickly and avoided looking at the seats. Sometimes I heard small sounds like a soft tap or a distant sigh, but I never saw the figure again as clearly as those 2 times. Part of me still felt jumpy, but I also felt a strange respect for whatever it was. It had its place in that old auditorium, and we had ours. We finished our production, and I stayed in the group for the rest of the semester. As time passed, new rumors popped up. Someone said they felt a chill brush past them backstage. Another person claimed they spotted a shape by the curtain. I always listened, but I didn't say much. I just told them we needed to be mindful in that space, lock up carefully, and not stay alone too long after midnight. Most of them laughed it off, but I saw how they looked at the back row whenever we wrapped up. I can't explain everything I saw or heard in that auditorium, but I know I felt something there and I saw it with my own eyes. I don't bring it up often, because some people think it's a joke or an overactive imagination. But if someone asks me directly, I tell them, yes, there's something in that old theater. I don't know what it wants or why it appears. I just know I saw it. And I'll never forget that moment when the shape vanished right in front of me. It made me realize that some places hold on to events even if we don't fully understand how. And whether I like it or not, that auditorium keeps showing me that we're not the only ones who use that space. It felt real and undeniable, and I still feel a chill when I think about it. I never wanted a parrot. When my grandfather passed and left me his, I wasn't exactly excited about it. Still, I felt an obligation. He'd had Chico for years, and everyone knew how much he cared about that bird. The parrot was a fixture in his home. It used to sit in a modest cage on the terrace, squawking words like hello, good morning, or want a cracker. Nothing unusual, but everything changed after the funeral. That bird started saying things I'd never heard before. At first it was unsettling, then it got downright disturbing. I remember the first time Chico said something that threw me off. I was cleaning the terrace, sweeping away dust and leaves. The old cage stood there, covered with a light cloth because it was still early and I didn't want the sunlight to bother him. Out of nowhere I heard a low rasp. "Don't forget your old man." I froze, gripping the broom handle so hard my knuckles whitened. I lifted the cloth a bit and Chico was just sitting on his perch, blinking. I stared at him. He cocked his head and stayed silent. I thought I might have been imagining it, but I knew what I'd heard. I tried to brush it off as a leftover phrase my grandfather must have taught him. But it didn't feel like one of Grandpa's usual lines. The tone was different. It felt heavier. I told myself I was just spooked because of all the stress. It had only been a couple of weeks since the funeral, and I was feeling the pressure of settling his affairs. The house felt different. Even the air seemed stale, like it was stuck in a loop of old memories. But I forced myself to ignore it. I went on with my day, sorting paperwork and making phone calls. I placed Chico's cage in the corner of the terrace, the same spot Grandpa always kept him. Late that afternoon, I heard Chico squawk again. He repeated the phrase, "Don't forget your old man." The exact same intonation. It sounded so close to my grandfather's voice. I felt a twist in my stomach. My eyes were glued to the parrot, but I said nothing. I felt a bead of sweat roll down my temple. Eventually, I shrugged it off and walked inside, heart pounding. Things escalated that night. I decided to spend the night at Grandpa's place, sorting through more stuff early the next morning. Around 3 a.m., I jolted awake. I heard a voice calling my name. It wasn't a normal call, it sounded urgent and a bit gruff. It was so similar to Grandpa's tone that I actually believed for a second that he was in the room. My heart hammered in my chest. I sat up in bed, trying to figure out what was happening. Then I heard Chico from the terrace. He screamed my name in that same voice again. I stumbled out of bed, mind racing, and ran toward the sound. My pulse throbbed in my ears. Chico was flapping his wings inside the cage, letting out the strangest laughter. It was this half-parrot, half-human chuckle. Then he said, "You thought I was gone?" He even seemed to linger on each word. I couldn't wrap my head around it. I felt short of breath, like I was about to panic. My skin tingled. I approached the cage. His eyes shone in the dim light from the hallway lamp. The feathers along his neck were ruffled. I swallowed hard. I took a step closer and asked, "Chico, what's wrong?" He just tilted his head, stared at me, and then went silent. I thought maybe I should just cover the cage, so I grabbed the cloth from the chair next to it. The moment I draped it over the cage, I heard a faint whisper. "I'm still here." It sounded exactly like my grandfather's voice. I stepped back so fast I almost tripped. My mouth went dry. I stood there for a few more seconds, listening, but Chico didn't repeat anything else. My hands were shaking when I finally walked away. The next day I tried to keep busy. I handled some insurance matters, looked through old family photographs, and made calls. But I kept thinking about the weird incidents. I kept telling myself it was just a bird repeating phrases. Parrots do that, but these phrases were too personal, too exact. They felt directed at me. I thought about taking Chico to a friend of mine who knows about birds. Then I realized I couldn't just pass him off. He was my responsibility now. I told myself it might be easier if I wasn't living in Grandpa's house every night, but I wanted to finish clearing out the place before making a decision. That evening, I covered Chico's cage again before going to bed, hoping that would keep him quiet. But I kept hearing faint rustling noises. The house was too silent, so every little sound felt amplified. My ears were always on alert. I tried turning on the TV in the living room to get some background noise, but I found myself straining to hear if Chico was going to say anything. My nerves were shot. When midnight rolled around, I finally decided to crash on the couch. I turned off the lights, pulled up a blanket, and tried to sleep. I drifted in and out, never fully at ease. Then, at around 3 a.m., I heard a soft whisper. Not a squawk, not a typical parrot noise. It sounded like someone talking. I sat up on the couch, heart pounding, and I listened. I could hear a slight movement from the terrace. It was Chico again. I forced myself to get up and check. My steps were slow and careful. I could hear my own heartbeat. When I pulled the curtain aside, I saw the cloth over the cage shifting like the bird was flailing his wings. I heard him say, "I can see you." My hands felt clammy. I lifted the cloth just a bit, and he looked right at me, eyes dilated. Then he repeated, "I can see you." I stood there silent, unsure of what to do. He let out a soft, uneven cackle, then quieted down. After that, I couldn't sleep. I just paced around the house, checking the locks on the doors and windows. I felt watched. The next day, my nerves were so fried I couldn't focus on anything. I called a friend and told him about Chico. He laughed at first, saying parrots pick up new words all the time. I tried to explain the weirdness, the personal nature of the phrases, and how it felt like my grandfather's voice coming through. He sounded skeptical, but he told me to get some rest and maybe put the bird in a different room. So that night, I moved Chico into a small office by the front door. I covered his cage early, making sure he couldn't see me. But once again, I heard faint whispering. I went to bed anyway, determined to ignore it. Around 2:45 a.m., I woke up sweating. I heard a light tapping noise. At first, I thought it was coming from somewhere outside, but then I realized it was inside the house. I got up and walked to the office. The door was ajar and the overhead light was off, but there was enough street light coming through the window to see the outline of the cage. The cloth was on the floor. Chico was standing on his perch, tapping his beak against the metal bars. When he saw me, he froze. Then, in a low tone, he said, "I'm watching you." That was all, but the voice was the same breathy tone Grandpa used when he was making a joke, except there was no humor in it. Goosebumps spread across my arms. My stomach felt heavy, like I'd swallowed a stone. I had no idea how a parrot could replicate that exact voice. It didn't feel natural. I thought about leaving the house right then. I felt an urge to grab my car keys and drive anywhere else. But I couldn't leave Chico alone. I also felt this stubborn sense of responsibility to face whatever was going on. I told myself it was a ridiculous reaction, It was just a bird, right? But I couldn't ignore how freaked out I was. My heart wouldn't stop racing. I clenched my fists, told Chico to settle down and place the cloth over the cage again. He made a soft croaking sound, almost like a muffled laugh. Then he quieted down. I shut the office door. I stood there for a few seconds, feeling uneasy. Finally, I returned to bed. The next morning, I realized I couldn't go on like this. I called an acquaintance who runs an animal shelter. I asked if they took parrots. She said they could, but she also mentioned parrots are better off with people they know. I hung up, feeling guilty. This wasn't an ordinary bird, but it was still my grandfather's pet. I owed it to him to at least try and figure out if there was some rational explanation. Maybe the parrot was just repeating random phrases my grandfather used in private. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was happening. The following night, I decided to stay alert. I set an alarm for 2:30 a.m., so I would be awake before the strange activity began. I wanted to see if there was a pattern. At 2:30 a.m., I got out of bed quietly. I didn't turn on the hallway light. The house was pitch black except for the glow of a street lamp filtering through the windows. I crept over to the office door and listened. I heard nothing at first. Then, around 2:45 a.m., I heard Chico start moving. His wings rustled against the bars. I pressed my ear against the door. Then, at around 3 a.m., he started whispering. It was too soft to make out every word, but I caught phrases like, "still here," and "you remember." My heart pounded as I realized he was stringing words together that I associated with my grandfather. Like, I swear I heard him say, "You remember our talks?" I took a deep breath and slowly turned the doorknob. When I peeked inside, Chico was perched on the side of his cage, staring straight at me with this intense look. Then he let out a sudden squawk, loud enough to make me jump. He said, "You can't run." The voice was so raspy it sounded like it was strangling the words out. My legs felt weak. My mind was telling me there was a logical explanation, but my instincts were screaming. I switched on the light. Chico blinked a few times and then hopped to another perch. He looked like a normal parrot for a moment. But then he said, in a calmer voice, "Why did you cover me?" He had never said that before. It was so direct. I stepped back until I was against the office wall. I didn't know what to say. My throat felt tight. I just stood there, paralyzed. Eventually, Chico went quiet. For the next 2 days, I kept the cage covered during the day as well. I hardly uncovered him at all. I felt bad doing that because I knew parrots need stimulation and social interaction, but I didn't know what else to do. I was on edge every minute I was in that house. I would jump at the sound of the phone. Even the hum of the refrigerator would make me twitch. I tried to block out the nighttime incidents by keeping the TV on until I fell asleep. But it didn't change the fact that around 3 a.m. every night, Chico would start muttering or making weird noises. Sometimes I'd get up to check. Other times, I'd lie there in bed sweating and gripping the blankets, pretending I couldn't hear it. The final straw was a few nights later. I was in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep again. My eyes flicked to the clock. 2:59 a.m. Right on time, I heard a scraping noise from the office. Then I heard 3 loud thumps against the cage. I grabbed my flashlight from the nightstand. My hands were shaking so much that I dropped it on the floor. I picked it up, turned it on, and walked down the hallway. My heart was going so fast I could barely think straight. I opened the office door a crack and shone the light inside. Chico was rattling the bars with his beak. Then he stopped, swiveled his head toward me, and said, "I never left." It was that same voice again, that chilling echo of my grandfather. He sounded almost angry this time. I felt my knees go weak. My breathing got shallow. My stomach churned. I stood there holding the flashlight on him. Then he screeched, a harsh, grating sound that made my ears ring. I slammed the door shut, stumbled back into my bedroom, and locked the door behind me. I stayed awake until morning, just waiting for something else to happen. By dawn, I was completely exhausted and had a throbbing headache. I listened for any more noises but heard nothing. When the sun came up, I decided I was done. I couldn't keep living like that. I had no plan yet, but I knew I had to leave the house for a while. I got dressed, grabbed some essentials, and without even looking at the office door, I walked out the front door. I felt an immediate sense of relief just stepping outside. I'm not sure what I'll do with Chico. I can't keep living with the nightly whispers and that eerie voice. Maybe I'll pay someone to train him, see if they can get rid of those disturbing phrases. Maybe I'll bring him to an aviary. All I know is my grandfather's memory doesn't feel peaceful in that bird anymore. It feels like something else entirely, something I don't want around me. I feel guilty saying that, but it's the truth. I've never been so uneasy in my entire life, and I've been through some rough stuff. For now, I'm staying at a friend's place. I left Chico in the house. I made sure he had enough food and water. I'll go back soon to check on him. But I'm dreading it. Every time I think about that bird's eyes, or the way he perfectly mimics that strange version of Grandpa's voice, I get chills. That cage, covered or not, doesn't feel like enough of a barrier anymore. I can still hear his words echoing in my head. I'm still here. You can't run. It's like my grandfather or something else is using Chico as a mouthpiece. I can't explain it. But I know one thing. I can't ignore it anymore. Something happened to that parrot after Grandpa died. And now, I'm left to deal with it. I woke up with a sudden heaviness on my legs that felt completely off. My eyes opened right away. I reached for the switch on my bedside lamp, and the light hit me in the face. I blinked a few times, trying to understand what was going on. There was a stack of books on top of my blanket, covering my shins. They were not scattered, they were lined up, one on top of the other, and there were about 10 of them. I felt my breathing speed up. My room was quiet. My cat was sitting at the foot of the bed, looking at me. The fur on her back was a little raised, and she had this tense look in her eyes. I checked the door right away because I always lock it at night. It was locked. The knob didn't turn when I tried it. No one else was in the room. Yet these books were from a shelf that stayed closed behind a glass door. That shelf wasn't in plain reach for anyone who just wandered in. I pushed the blankets aside and sat up. My throat felt dry. I lifted the top book, ran my hand over its cover, and checked the title. I recognized it right away. It was one of my older volumes, a rare edition I'd found at a small shop. I carefully set it aside on the nightstand, then checked the next one. Same shelf, same style of old, worn hardcover. I held it up and turned it around to see if there was any damage. It looked fine. I counted them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All older volumes. None of them were light paperbacks. These were heavy books. I couldn't see how they ended up on my legs in a neat stack. My cat couldn't have done this. She sometimes knocks a book off a table, but she doesn't carry anything around. And she definitely doesn't stack them that carefully. The spines were aligned. It looked deliberate. I stood up, ran my hand through my hair, and walked over to the shelf. The glass door was closed. I didn't see any damage or sign that someone had forced it open, but the lock mechanism, a small latch, was undone. I know I locked it before going to bed. I always keep my rare books behind that glass door because I don't want dust or random accidents to damage them. I tried to recall my routine from the previous night. I'm obsessive about locking everything. I turn off my lights, lock the windows, lock the door, put the cat's food in her bowl, and go to sleep. That's my schedule. So how did this happen? The rest of the room looked normal. No furniture was moved. My desk was in its usual spot. My closet door was closed. My windows were closed and locked from the inside. There was no chair or stool near the shelf, so it wasn't like someone had rearranged the furniture. I checked the floor for footprints or dirt. I didn't see anything out of place. My room is always a bit messy with random papers or small trinkets, but I know where everything is. This time, nothing looked disturbed except for the books on my bed. I felt sweat on my forehead and my pulse was going fast. My cat let out a short meow, almost like she was trying to get my attention. I turned toward her. She jumped off the bed and paced around my legs. I bent down and patted her head for a moment. I felt a wave of unease. I didn't understand what was happening. I decided to check the hallway. Maybe I'd find something out there. I walked to my bedroom door, slid the bolt, and opened it. The hallway was dark. Everything was quiet. I checked the front door of the apartment, still locked. I looked around the living room. Nothing out of the ordinary. My heart kept thumping. I opened a few closets just to make sure no one was hiding inside. They were empty, just my coats and some boxes. I went back to my room and examined the books again. I stacked them on my desk for a closer look. Each one came from that locked shelf. Some were from the early 1900s, some from mid-century. All were in good condition. I flipped through a few pages. I didn't see any torn edges or strange markings. They looked the same as always. I put them aside and tried to calm down. It was around 3 in the morning. I thought about going back to sleep, but my mind kept racing. I decided to make some coffee to keep myself alert. I walked to the kitchen, turned on the light, and started the coffee machine. I stared at the black countertop, waiting for the coffee to brew. The smell usually comforts me, but that night I felt a knot in my stomach. I took my mug back to my room and sat in my chair. I tried to piece things together step by step. No one had a key to my bedroom. I live alone. My cat doesn't open doors or move objects around in an organized way. She's lazy and mostly sleeps all day. The windows are locked and I'm on a higher floor. Even if someone tried to climb in, I would probably hear it or they would break something, and I'd see some sign of forced entry, but there was nothing. The glass door to the shelf had no scratches or cracks. I started to wonder if I forgot to lock it, but I remember turning that latch. I remember the click it makes. I remember being so careful, because a while back a friend almost broke one of those books by dropping it. So I locked that door all the time. I got up and tested the latch a few times. It worked fine. I turned the small key, listened to the sound, and jiggled it. It didn't budge when locked. I tried it unlocked, and it opened easily. I locked it again, then stepped back. I stared at the shelf for a good minute. Then I walked to my door, locked it from the inside, and sat back on the bed. I wasn't sure if I should call someone or just wait until morning. I picked up my phone, scrolled through my contacts, and realized how late it was. I didn't want to freak out my friends or family. I decided to wait. My cat hopped onto the bed and curled up near my pillow. I put the stacked books in a safe place on my desk, far from the edge. I slid into bed again, but I didn't turn off the lamp. I couldn't sleep in the dark after that. I stayed awake until sunrise, looking at my door from time to time, sipping what was left of my coffee. My legs felt restless, and I kept shifting around. Every small noise, every hum from the fridge, every soft tap from the pipes made me tense. When morning came, I finally felt calmer. I got dressed and checked every corner of my place again. Everything was normal. I decided to head to my neighborhood store for more coffee and some groceries. I locked my apartment door behind me, took the elevator, and walked outside. The air felt cool on my face, and the traffic on the street sounded a bit louder than usual. Maybe I was more aware of my surroundings. I got to the store, bought a few things, and made small talk with the cashier. I didn't mention the incident. I was still trying to figure out what to say. On my way back, I felt a slight sense of dread. I imagined coming back to find more books out of place. But when I stepped inside, everything was how I left it. I put my groceries away, checked my bedroom again, and saw no changes. The books were still on the desk. I approached them and flipped through a couple of them once more. I paid attention to the pages, the smell of old paper, the slight yellow tint on the edges. They were in the same order. I set them down and decided to get some work done to distract myself. I work from home sometimes, doing freelance projects on my computer. Usually I like to be surrounded by my books. But that day the shelves felt intimidating. I tried to focus on my tasks, typing emails and reading documents. Every now and then, I looked over at that glass door. I locked it again in the morning, but I checked it one more time around noon. It was still locked. The cat was napping on a cushion near the window. She seemed calm, which gave me a small measure of relief. Cats can sense tension, in my experience, so maybe everything was under control for now. As night approached, I felt my chest tighten. I ate a quick dinner in the kitchen. My stomach was in knots, so I barely finished my meal. I decided to double lock everything. I checked the windows, tested each latch, and even drew the curtains. Then I went to my bedroom and inspected the shelf once again. I opened the glass door, picked up a random book, put it back, and locked the door. I made sure it was secure. Then I locked my bedroom door from the inside. I pulled on the doorknob twice. It stayed shut. I turned off the overhead light, leaving just a small lamp by my desk on. I brushed my teeth, changed into sweatpants and a t-shirt, and sat on my bed with my phone in hand. I thought about staying up all night, but I felt exhausted after not sleeping much the previous night. I set an alarm for midnight on my phone, hoping I could take a nap and then wake up to check the room. I laid back against my pillows and tried to keep my eyes open. My body felt heavy and my eyelids started to droop. I heard my cat jump onto a nearby chair. Then I think I drifted off for a while. Suddenly my phone's alarm blared. I jerked up. The lamp was still on. The cat was on the chair staring at me. I looked around the room. Nothing had changed. The shelf door was still closed. My bedroom door was locked. I exhaled in relief. I turned off the alarm, walked around the room a bit to stretch my legs, then laid back down. I tried to fight my drowsiness, but around 1:30 a.m., I felt my head nodding. I don't remember falling asleep. I only remember waking up to a weight on my legs again. This time it was lighter, but it still got my attention. My eyes flew open, and I shot up, nearly kicking my blanket away. The lamp was on, so I saw everything right away. There were only 3 books this time, but they were from the same shelf. They were stacked neatly on top of my calves. My heart pounded and I clenched my jaw. My throat felt tight and my chest was hammering. I tossed the blanket aside and the books dropped onto the mattress. I jumped out of bed and checked the door. Locked. I grabbed the handle and pulled hard. It didn't move. I ran over to the glass door of the shelf. The latch was open again and the door was slightly ajar. I felt my legs tremble. There were no footprints or anything on the floor. No sign of forced entry. My cat was near the closet, not near the bed. She looked at me with wide eyes. I stood there for a good minute, breathing fast. My skin felt clammy. I grabbed the books and set them on the desk. My mind was racing with questions. There was no one in the hallway, no one under the bed, no one in the closet. Nothing was broken. Yet those books had moved from a locked shelf to my bed while I slept for maybe an hour or 2. I couldn't process it. I spent the rest of the night pacing my bedroom, double-checking corners and staring at that shelf. I tried to think about rational explanations. I didn't come up with any that made sense. The next morning, I opened the door to the hallway and found everything normal. I checked the front door again, locked, no damage. The cat seemed fine. She rubbed against my legs, looking for attention. I gave her food and water, then walked back to my room. The books were still there on the desk where I left them. It's been a few days since that second incident. I haven't told my neighbors. I haven't told many friends. I'm trying to act like everything is normal, but I haven't been sleeping well. I keep expecting to wake up with more books on my legs. Every night I lock the shelf. Every morning I check it. So far there haven't been any more incidents, but I feel on edge. My cat has been staying close to me. She follows me around the apartment, almost like she senses I'm uneasy. I make sure all the doors and windows are secure. I don't hear anything unusual at night, and I don't see anything strange when I look out into the hallway. But the memory of those stacked books keeps replaying in my mind. I know it wasn't a nightmare. I have the books, and I know where they belong. I remember how the spines felt, how the weight on my legs felt, how the lock on the glass door was undone. That's my life now. I wake up every morning, check the shelf, check the cat, check the door. I don't have a satisfying explanation. I just keep going through my days hoping it doesn't happen again. And if it does, I'm not sure what I'll do. For now, I stick to my routine, watch my cat, and keep a close eye on that shelf. That's the only thing I can do. I'll never forget that Tuesday. It started as just another day on the road, driving from one small town to another, looking for potential customers and checking in with old ones. Around noon, my stomach started to grumble, so I looked for a place to eat. I spotted a small luncheonette that had a big sign out front that said, "Open." The lights in the windows were glowing bright. It looked clean, and there were no other cars around. I decided to give it a try. I parked right out front. The empty parking lot felt unusual, but I shrugged it off. I just wanted a quick meal. I never expected to step into one of the strangest moments of my entire traveling career. I turned off the engine and stepped out of my car. The sunlight felt strong on my face, and the asphalt radiated heat. I took a quick glance around. There were no other vehicles. The building itself wasn't very big. It had a main door at the front with a single glass panel, and the interior lights were bright enough to let me see the outlines of the tables inside. I pulled open the door. A small bell rang above my head. As I walked in, I smelled fresh coffee. The air was cool thanks to some air conditioner humming in the background. There were maybe 6 tables total, each with a couple of chairs, all neatly arranged. Salt and pepper shakers sat in the middle of every table, and I saw a laminated menu on the counter near the register. Everything looked organized. Everything looked normal. I waited for someone to show up. Nobody greeted me. The place seemed empty. The coffee smell was strong, but there was no one at the register. There was no one in the seats. I leaned over the counter and tried to make eye contact with any employee who might be in the kitchen. Nothing. I tapped my knuckles on the counter. I said, "Hello?" My voice sounded a little louder than I'd intended, probably because I was alone in this silent place. I waited for an answer, but all I got was the hum of the air conditioner. I checked my watch. It was right around noon. There was no sign of a single human being. The silence felt heavier each second. I peered at the coffee machine behind the counter. A pot of coffee sat there, half full. The hot plate was on. I saw a slight wisp of steam rising. I could hear the faint, steady drip from the machine. That meant it hadn't been too long since someone had set it up. Maybe they stepped out for a minute. Maybe they had a small bathroom break. I glanced toward a door in the back, thinking it might lead to an office or a storage area. I debated whether I should walk around and knock harder. My stomach rumbled again, so I decided to speak up. "Hello? Anybody here?" No response. I felt a bit uncomfortable, but I tried to rationalize it. Sometimes places like this are run by a single person who also has to manage the kitchen. Maybe they popped out for supplies in a back room. I gave it another minute. I stood there, tapping my fingertips on the counter. My eyes shifted around. The walls displayed cheap posters of hamburgers, French fries, and sodas. A dull clock hung near the door, ticking quietly. I heard every second pass. I felt this odd tension in my shoulders, and I tried to roll them out to relax. After a little more waiting, I decided to check the kitchen. I know it's usually off limits, but I felt a growing sense of unease. Something about the completely silent dining area made my nerves prickle. I stepped behind the counter slowly, hoping I wouldn't startle anyone. I lightly pushed open the swinging door to the kitchen. The warmth from inside hit me in the face. There was the smell of oil, and I heard the faint sizzle of something on a hot surface. But when I looked around, I didn't see a single person. The grill on the flat-top station was turned on, and a spatula lay on the side, glistening with grease. I saw a few burger buns on the counter, a container of sliced tomatoes, onions, lettuce, and a bag of fries open beside the fryer. Everything was waiting, as if someone had been in the middle of making an order, and then just vanished. It was unnerving. "Hello?" I called out again, louder. My voice bounced off the metal surfaces. Silence. My chest tightened a bit, and I felt my heartbeat speed up. The only sounds were a quiet sizzle on the grill and the hum of the fridge units. I could see that the fryer was on, the oil shimmering. No baskets, no sign of movement. The overhead lights lit everything clearly. There weren't any dark corners or hidden spots. It was just an empty kitchen in full operation minus the cook. I stepped farther in. The tile floor felt a bit slick under my shoes. I looked to the right and saw another door that likely led to a storage area. I knocked gently, waited, and heard nothing. I opened it, inching forward, ready to apologize if I startled someone. But inside was just a small storeroom stacked with boxes of soda, condiments, and paper cups. There was no exit there, no human presence. I listened, but I only heard the hum of freezers and my own breathing. My breath became shallow. My hands felt clammy. I walked back into the main kitchen space. I noticed a partially used roll of paper towels on the prep counter, and it looked like somebody had just dried their hands. The sink was still dripping. There were fresh water droplets around the stainless steel basin. That meant someone was there a moment ago, right? And yet, there was nobody around now. I pressed my lips together, feeling a trickle of sweat on my forehead despite the air conditioning. I backed out of the kitchen, returning to the empty dining area. I looked around, scanning the tables, the windows, the front door, wondering if I missed something. The entire place was still empty. The front window was clear. I saw my car parked outside. The road beyond had light traffic. Nothing unusual. Yet here I was, alone in a fully functioning diner without any staff. I felt my heart pounding against my chest. It was an odd mix of confusion and discomfort. My mind started to race with possibilities, but I tried to stay calm. I walked to the front door and opened it. The bell jingled again. I stepped out onto the sidewalk and looked around for any sign of life. Nothing. The highway stretched to my left and right. I saw a few cars speeding by in the distance. No one was pulling over. I considered whether I should wait a bit longer. Maybe the owner had some emergency, or maybe they were outside. But why would they leave everything on? I went back inside, letting the door close behind me. The bell rang again, the only sound in that silent space. I leaned on the counter, unsure of what to do. The tension in my stomach grew heavier by the second. My throat felt dry. I spotted a small fridge with bottled water under the counter. I hesitated, then reached over and grabbed a bottle. The cooler air from the fridge brushed against my hand. I twisted off the cap and took a sip. It tasted normal, just plain water. I put a couple dollars on the counter, feeling odd about it but also not wanting to just take something for free. I waited a few more moments, clearing my throat now and then, but there was no sign of movement. I thought about making my own lunch. That's crazy, I told myself. You don't walk into a stranger's kitchen and cook your own burger. But the grill was ready. The fryer was hot. My stomach rumbled again, and I realized I was hungrier than I thought. My nerves were jumbled, but the smell of cooking oil and warm grill was pushing me to consider it. Still, that felt too weird. That tension of doing something completely out of line made me push the thought away. Instead, I walked over to a table and sat down. The seat creaked under me. I placed my elbows on the table and tried to calm down. I looked at the laminated menu, flipping through the pages. It had the usual items: burgers, fries, sandwiches, milkshakes. Prices looked average, nothing special. The quiet around me made every breath sound louder. After about 2 or 3 minutes of this, my nerves got the best of me. The sense of being watched even though there was no one there grew stronger. My skin prickled with that uneasy feeling. My eyes darted to every corner, but I saw nobody. I decided it wasn't worth staying. I stood up, left the menu on the table, and walked out the front door. The bell gave one last ring. Outside, I took in a big gulp of air, relieved to be under the open sky again. I headed to my car, got behind the wheel, and slammed the door. The seatbelt felt tight against my chest as I clicked it into place. I turned on the ignition, and my car hummed to life. I stared at the lanchonette through the windshield. The sign still said, "Open." The lights were still on. It looked perfectly normal from the outside. That's what unsettled me the most. I pulled out of the parking spot carefully. My tires made a slight crunch on the gravel near the edge of the pavement. As I drove away, I looked in my rearview mirror. The diner's lights glowed against the midday sun, and I felt my pulse throb in my temples. I expected something to happen, a person to walk out, or the lights to turn off. But nothing changed. It just stayed there, empty and bright, like it had never been abandoned at all. That image stuck in my mind. A lonely diner on the side of the road, running at full tilt, but without a single soul around. My drive continued in a blur of thoughts and uneasy feelings. I tried to make sense of it. Did I miss a sign on the door that said they were closed for some reason? No, the sign said, "Open." The grills and fryer were on, the coffee machine was running. Could there have been a medical emergency? Could the staff have rushed out to help someone outside? But then why not turn anything off? Why leave everything out in the open? The questions piled up. I kept checking my mirrors as if expecting to see something following me, but I only saw the empty road behind me. 10 minutes later, I found a gas station and pulled in to collect my thoughts. I parked next to a pump and turned off my car. I stepped out, letting the hot air hit me again. I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake off the tension in my muscles. I felt shaky. I walked into the convenience store, grabbed a soda, and paid at the counter. The cashier greeted me with a smile. I felt a wave of relief, just seeing another person's face. I almost asked them if they knew anything about the diner down the road, but I stopped myself. I didn't even know how to describe what had happened, and I wasn't in the mood for a long conversation. I just nodded, paid for my drink, and left. I got back into my car and sipped the soda. The sugar helped calm my nerves. I pulled out my phone, thinking about calling someone to talk about the weird situation, but I realized I didn't know who to call. My boss wouldn't care. My friends would probably laugh and say I was being dramatic. So I just sat there, letting the car's air conditioning soothe my sweaty neck. I thought about going back, but I didn't see the point. There was no reason to return to that empty place. I felt a little guilt for leaving without a proper goodbye or without making sure nobody was hurt. But I'd walked around. I hadn't seen any sign of trouble, just emptiness. After a few minutes, I decided to keep driving to my next client. The meeting wasn't scheduled until 2 p.m., so I had some time. On the drive, I turned on the radio, trying to drown out the uneasy thoughts. I flipped through stations. Local news, music, talk radio. Nothing about a mysterious empty diner. Nothing about anything unusual happening that day. The highway stretched on, and the farmland on both sides looked calm under the midday sun. When I finally arrived at my client's place, I tried to act normal, but I felt a tightness in my chest. My shirt was damp under my armpits. My handshake was probably shaky. My client asked if I was okay, and I just said I hadn't eaten yet, which was partly true. We had a short meeting, and I left with an order form. Normally, I'd have stopped again for lunch, but I wasn't in the mood. My appetite was gone. My thoughts kept returning to that diner, playing over the details. The smell of hot oil, the quiet dining area, the drip of the coffee machine. The tension in my body didn't fully go away for hours. Later that evening, I checked into a motel. I dropped my bag on the bed and sat down, letting out a deep sigh. I found myself staring at the wall, wondering what had really happened. Maybe there was some simple explanation, but I couldn't figure out what it might be. The image of that warm grill and the half-prepped food kept looping in my mind, along with the lonely hum of the air conditioner. I felt the hair on my arms stand up just recalling the silence. I tried to watch some TV, hoping to distract myself. I flicked through the channels. None of it held my attention. Eventually, I gave up and decided to get dinner at a chain restaurant across the street. The normalcy of other customers and employees chatting gave me a feeling of relief. I ordered a burger and fries, but I kept glancing at the kitchen, half expecting everyone to disappear. Of course, that didn't happen. My food arrived, the waitress asked how I was doing, and the place felt alive and normal. I ate quickly. Everything tasted fine, but the memory of that empty diner dulled my appetite. I've told this story a few times to colleagues when we talk about weird stuff that happens on the road. Most people just laugh or call me paranoid. Some say maybe I got there right at the moment everyone decided to step out. But the fact that the grills and fryer were on and the coffee was freshly brewed makes that hard to believe. I still don't know. All I have is my memory of walking into a roadside diner that seemed open for business but had absolutely no one inside. The tension I felt was real. My hands shook and my heart pounded. I can't explain why everyone vanished or why the place was left running like that, but I know I didn't imagine it. Since then, I've changed up my route, and I usually stick to more familiar places. I don't like surprises. Every time I pass a roadside diner, I look for cars in the parking lot before I pull in. If I don't see any, I just keep driving. That might be silly, but that experience shook me up. There are moments when I think I should have gone back in, dug around more, tried to call someone, but the unease was too strong. Stepping into a silent, fully operational diner with not a single person around felt like crossing a line into territory I didn't understand. So, I left. I still feel weird about it sometimes. I guess it'll always be that strange memory I can't explain. And that's it. That's the story. It happened on a regular Tuesday, right at noon, in the middle of nowhere. A small place, lights on, sign advertising they were open, hot grill, fresh coffee, nobody home. I got out of there, confused and tense, and kept driving. I looked in my rearview mirror, and the lights were still on. The place was still glowing, like it had never been abandoned. I don't know what else to say. It's just how it went down. I haven't gone back, and I don't plan to. That empty diner can stay in my memory as a strange stop on a lonely stretch of highway. I've had my share of odd experiences in sales, but nothing quite like that day. That's the whole thing, exactly how I remember it. I felt my heart slam against my ribs the second I heard my bedroom door crash shut. It was around 2 a.m, and I'd just gotten back from a party that went on way too long. I was half sober, half buzzed, and I felt the kind of dread that cuts straight through any leftover alcohol in your system. I stood there in the hallway, trying to make sense of what happened, feeling the sweat start to gather on my forehead. My dorm building was new. The walls still had that fresh paint smell. The floors weren't scratched yet, and the communal areas looked like the contractor had just left. But rumors spread fast. People said the building stood on old land, like there had been something else here before. Some said it was a forgotten foundation from decades ago. Others said there was a crumbling structure under the parking lot. Everyone had a story, and none of them felt right. I didn't pay much attention to those rumors at first. I was on an exchange program, excited about a new place, new classes, and new friends. I lived with 3 other guys in a shared apartment on one of the upper floors. The elevator barely made a sound when it moved. The corridors felt too quiet at night, like the walls absorbed every noise. I never saw security roaming around. The only real sign of life came from the occasional footsteps of someone coming back from class or a night out. That night, though, the silence was crushing. There was a slight hum from the elevator machinery behind a wall, but it only made the hallway feel more vacant. Fluorescent lights flickered a bit, casting a sharp glare on the freshly painted walls. I headed toward my room, still fumbling with my phone to check the time. That's when I saw my door standing wide open. My first thought was that one of my roommates had borrowed something and forgot to close it. We had a habit of leaving notes or sending a quick text if we did that, so it felt odd. The corridor was empty. No one else was around. I walked up, poked my head inside, and called out, "Hey, anyone in here?" No response. The place seemed dark. I saw the faint outline of my desk, bed, and closet. Everything looked normal at a glance. I was about to step inside when the door moved like someone yanked it from the other side. It slammed so hard the echo rushed through the hallway. The force rattled the hinges and I could feel a vibration in the floor. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't see a hand or any movement. The door just snapped shut. I grabbed the doorknob and pushed it open, my mind racing. "Who the hell is in here?" My voice shook a little, but I yelled as loud as I could. The room was empty. My bed was unmade the way I left it. The closet doors were open, and there was nothing but a pile of clothes and shoes inside. My desk chair stood in its usual spot. The mini fridge hummed. It smelled like leftover pizza because I'd thrown a half-eaten slice in the trash earlier. Nothing else stood out. My stomach churned with the kind of tension that made me want to throw up. I checked every corner, even under the bed. Nothing. There was no one behind the door either. The hinges looked fine, no sign of damage. I tried the doorknob a few times. It wasn't loose or broken. I locked the door, stepped back into the hallway, then back in again, trying to see if there was some weird draft. The corridor itself was still. The only air circulation came from a small vent overhead, not strong enough to make a door slam like that. It made no sense. I couldn't shake off the feeling that someone else had been there, but I saw no one. My heart was pounding, and my hands felt clammy. I shut my room door again, locked it, then leaned my forehead against the wood. I stayed like that for a few seconds, trying to calm down. Part of me thought I might have imagined it, but the sound was too loud to be a trick of my mind. My ears were still ringing. Eventually, I stripped down to my boxers, collapsed on the bed, and stared at the ceiling. I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the door slamming over and over. Every little noise in the building, the water pipes, the elevator hum, or someone shutting a door down the hall, felt magnified. Around 3 in the morning, I heard a click in the hallway. It sounded like a latch. I got up, looked through the peephole, and saw nothing. My legs trembled. I felt goosebumps run over my arms. I didn't end up sleeping much. When the sun finally came up, I got dressed and went to the shared kitchen. The kitchen was down the hall, and we shared it with a few other students in neighboring units. 2 of my roommates were already there. One was making coffee, and the other was rummaging through the fridge. I leaned against the counter, bleary-eyed. "You look like hell," said Nick, the guy with the coffee. He was tall, wore track pants, and always looked like he'd just finished a workout. I took a breath. Yeah, something weird happened last night, around 2 in the morning. I came back, found my door open, then it slammed by itself. Hard. They both stared at me. Jake, the other roommate, raised an eyebrow. "Wait, you're sure nobody else was in there?" I shook my head. I checked everywhere, no one. It was like someone grabbed the door and threw it shut. Nick and Jake exchanged a look. I noticed that Nick's expression changed, like he'd heard something similar. He sipped his coffee. "You know, sometimes I hear doors slamming in the middle of the night. I always figured it was the guy 2 rooms down. He never sleeps." Jake nodded. "Or sometimes random people come back drunk, right? They slam doors. But you're saying your door was wide open first?" I confirmed it. They looked uneasy. Then our 3rd roommate, Adam, shuffled in. He had headphones around his neck and looked half asleep. He picked up on the tension and asked what was going on. Nick filled him in. Adam shrugged. "Dude, the other day I swear I heard footsteps in the corridor at like 3 in the morning. But when I opened the door, nobody was there." He paused. "I also heard about the rumors. Supposedly the building got built on some old property. People say the land's cursed or something." I felt a chill in my spine. I tried to laugh it off, but it came out weak. "Yeah, maybe it's just bad construction or weird drafts." We made small talk for a while, but the mood stayed tense. My mind kept going back to that door slamming. I couldn't stop picturing the way it swung shut with such force. That day, I had class and tried to focus on normal stuff. I sat through lectures, took notes, chatted with classmates, but whenever there was a quiet moment, the memory of that door snapping against the frame flooded back. I started second-guessing everything. Maybe someone had sneaked in and run out fast. But I remembered how quickly it happened. I doubted a person could move that fast without making some noise or bumping into me. That evening, I decided to stay in. Nick and Adam went out to meet friends. Jake stayed in his room, probably gaming or watching movies. I tried to watch a show on my laptop, but I kept pausing to listen for noises. Around midnight, I heard a soft thump in the hallway. I muted my show and waited. Nothing else came, so I resumed watching. Then, about 20 minutes later, I heard another door slam, this time farther away, maybe on the other side of the floor. I jumped up and walked to my door, pressing my ear against it. There were muffled voices. It could have been someone messing around or an argument. I couldn't tell. I flicked off my room light, opened the door just a crack, and peeked out. The hallway was dim. Some of the lights had been turned off for the night. I saw a figure at the far end near the elevators. It looked like a person standing still. I strained my eyes, but the figure vanished around the corner. For a moment, I thought about stepping out to see who it was, but I felt a wave of anxiety take over. My throat went dry. I closed the door and locked it again. I realized how tense my shoulders were. My muscles felt tight. I exhaled and tried to calm down. I told myself I was being paranoid. People come and go at all hours in a dorm. There's nothing unusual about that. But something felt off. I kept feeling like I was being watched, even though I knew the door was shut. The next day, I ran into a girl from down the hall. She looked tired. I asked if she'd heard anything weird at night. She frowned and said, "Doors are always slamming. I told maintenance about it, but they don't find anything. They keep saying it's the ventilation system or pressure changes." She paused. "But it's really loud sometimes, right?" I nodded. "Yeah, super loud. And sometimes it's my door." She gave me a worried look. "I've had my door slammed too, and I know I left it locked." Then she shrugged. "Anyway, see you around." She left in a hurry. She seemed spooked. That conversation made me more uneasy. It wasn't just me. It was happening to other people too. Sometimes hearing that others shared your experience should make you feel better. But I felt the opposite. It confirmed there was something strange going on in the building. That evening, my roommates and I grabbed some takeout and ate in the kitchen area. We joked around, talked about classes, upcoming tests, and random stuff. But every so often, the topic drifted back to the weird stuff in the building. Nick mentioned hearing tapping on the walls. Jake admitted he sometimes woke up in the middle of the night feeling like there was someone standing near his bed. He said he'd chalked it up to nightmares or stress, but now he wasn't so sure. Adam told us about hearing a distant banging sound that came from the stairwell, but when he checked it out, the stairwell was empty. We made a half-serious plan to stay up one night, walk around the corridors and see if we could catch anything. We laughed about it, but we all knew we were actually thinking about doing it. There was a weird energy in the air, like the building itself had a pulse. Around midnight, we all gathered in the living room area of our suite. We didn't turn off the lights, but we kept them low. We planned to wait for any noises. It was quiet at first. The fridge hummed. The air conditioning kicked on occasionally, sending a soft whoosh through the vents. Someone upstairs stomped around a bit, but that died down. Then, close to 1 a.m., we heard a distinct slam. It came from the corridor outside our suite. We looked at each other. Nick stood up first. "Let's go," he whispered. We opened our door quietly. The hallway light flickered a little. We walked in a line, keeping our voices low. We passed a couple of closed doors. Everything was still. The corridor stretched to the left and right. The right side led to the elevators. The left side went to the stairwell. Jake pointed to the left. He'd heard the noise come from that direction. So we headed there, our sneakers squeaking on the shiny floor. Each step made me more nervous. I could feel my pulse in my neck. We reached the stairwell door. It was closed. Adam pushed it open and we peeked inside. The concrete steps were empty. We didn't see or hear anyone. There was a slight echo, but no sign of movement. Jake let the door close. It made a metallic clang that bounced through the stairwell. We waited a few seconds. Still nothing. Nick leaned against the wall, took a breath. "That's weird," he muttered. We walked back to our suite, feeling uneasy. Just as we reached our door, another loud bang sounded, this time from somewhere behind us. We whipped around. One of the doors down the hall, a room that belonged to two guys we didn't know well, slammed shut. We saw the door vibrate from the impact. Then total silence. I considered going down there and knocking to ask if everything was okay, but a surge of fear stopped me. My stomach felt tight again. We all stared for a few more seconds. Nobody came out, and no voices emerged from behind that door. We made our way back into our apartment, locked our door, and sat in the living room, struggling to process everything. We stayed up another hour, but heard nothing else. Eventually, we all went to bed. I tossed and turned, thinking about the strange events. When I did sleep, I dreamed about someone standing outside my door, jiggling the handle. I woke up in a cold sweat around 4 in the morning, listening for any real sound. The hallway was quiet again, but I didn't feel comfortable. Classes and daily life went on as usual, but the tension in our dorm never faded. Every few nights a door would slam by itself. Sometimes I'd hear footsteps in the hallway at odd hours. Once I heard a drawer in the kitchen slam shut, but when I went to check, I found the kitchen lights off and no one around. Maintenance came by a couple of times for unrelated stuff. I casually asked them about the door issues. They shrugged and said something about air pressure changes in new buildings, how the ventilation can cause strong drafts in certain corridors. But I'd never felt a blast of air powerful enough to slam a door like that. The guys and I swapped stories with a few other people in the building, and many of them had similar experiences. Doors opening or slamming shut for no reason, random footsteps at night, strange shadows around corners. There was a steady level of unease. Nobody wanted to move out, but we all felt on edge. As the weeks went by, I kept hoping the weirdness would die down. But every so often something happened that reminded us this place didn't feel normal. Sometimes I'd step into the hallway and feel like someone had just been there watching me. My hair would stand on end, my skin would prickle. Other nights the dorm was so still you could hear the hum of the overhead lights, and then a door would slam from out of nowhere, rattling the entire floor. Nobody ever got hurt, and we never found actual evidence of an intruder. Eventually, we all adapted in our own ways. Nick started keeping earplugs by his bed. Jake went full skeptic and tried to laugh it off. Adam kept his headphones on most nights, playing music until he fell asleep. I began double-checking my door lock every time I left the room or came back, making sure it was secure. But I never forgot that moment when I first returned late from the party, saw my door standing open, and then watched it slam shut before my eyes. That night burned itself into my memory. I still feel the rush of fear whenever I think about it. The building may be new, but something about it carries a weight that doesn't belong to modern construction. You can sense it in the air when you walk through those corridors alone at night. It's like there's something we can't see moving around, waiting for someone to come back late and let their guard down. I don't have a clear explanation, and maybe there isn't one. All I know is that after that night, I took those rumors a lot more seriously. The next time I returned late from a party, I approached my door carefully, half expecting to see it open again. And every single time, my heart picked up speed. Because once you know something's off, you can't unknow it. You live with it, hoping you don't hear that slam echo through the hall, hoping it stays quiet, at least for one night. I jolted awake because I heard 3 loud knocks on the barn door. They sounded like someone pounding with a closed fist, but there was no reason for anyone to be out there at that hour. I was alone on the property, and I knew it. My heart raced right away, and I felt an instant rush of blood in my ears. My eyes widened, and I grabbed my flashlight. I didn't know what I was going to find, but I had to check. That was the start of a night that has been stuck in my head ever since. I arrived at my family's farm a few days before that incident. I had planned on spending a good chunk of my vacation there, mostly to fix a few things around the place. The old barn needed some repairs, and the main house had a few issues with the roof and the plumbing. It had been a few years since anyone stayed there for more than a weekend. The land is peaceful during the day, with a wide yard surrounded by trees. There's a feeling of quiet isolation out there. Neighbors aren't close, and you can't hear traffic. Once the sun goes down, everything gets very dark very fast. Even on nights with a bright moon, the surrounding trees block a lot of the light, so you end up with heavy shadows everywhere. The first night I slept in the main house. I got up early in the morning, made some coffee, and walked around the property. I checked the barn to see what needed fixing. The door had some loose hinges and the inside was cluttered with old tools, firewood, and leftover materials. I spent most of the morning organizing the place. I used a broom to sweep the floor and gather sawdust and leaves that had blown in through the gaps in the walls. I set aside a corner for the tools that still worked and made a separate area for the broken ones I planned to fix or toss out. By mid-afternoon, I was pretty tired, but I still had enough energy to deal with a leaky spot on the roof of the main house. After that, I thought I might as well eat an early dinner. I cooked a simple meal in the kitchen, just some rice, beans, and a couple of fried eggs. By the time I finished, the sun was already getting lower in the sky. I stepped outside and noticed how quiet the place got as evening approached. Sometimes you can hear crickets, sometimes a little rustling in the bushes, maybe a breeze passing through the trees. But that evening, everything felt still. It wasn't exactly unsettling. It was just a strong sense of silence that I wasn't used to. I double-checked that the barn door was securely closed. I locked it from the outside, but that old door always seemed a bit shaky. Then I headed back into the house. Once inside, I made sure all the windows were closed. I wasn't worried about intruders so much as wild animals. We'd seen raccoons and possums in the past, and I didn't want them sneaking in. Around 9 p.m., I decided to call it a day and went to bed. I was pretty sore from all the bending and lifting I had done, so I fell asleep fast. Everything stayed peaceful that night. The next day, I woke up early again, had some coffee, and resumed my chores. I repaired one of the windows in the house, organized a few rooms, and even considered painting some walls, but I realized I didn't have enough paint for the job. So I left that for another day. Around lunchtime, I drove to the nearest town, which is about 25 minutes away, to pick up some supplies, more nails, extra lumber, and a couple of flashlights. I also bought some snacks and extra water. When I returned to the farm, it was mid-afternoon. I parked my truck next to the barn and carried everything inside, where I had a little workbench set up. I spent a couple of hours sorting the new materials, then took a short break to drink some water and eat a sandwich. I went back outside around 5 p.m. to walk around the property and check on the fences. The air was crisp and the light was turning golden. It's one of my favorite parts of being out there, the late afternoon calm. But there was still this nagging feeling in the back of my head. The barn door had been giving me trouble since the first day. Every time I opened or closed it, it felt like it was hanging by a thread. I told myself I'd fix it soon, but I kept postponing it. That evening, I decided not to wait. I grabbed my toolbox and some of the new lumber, then headed to the barn. I replaced one of the frames around the door and tightened the hinges with fresh screws. I hammered a couple of boards along the inside where there was some rot. I worked until it got dark. The overhead light in the barn flickered once or twice, which made me a little uneasy, but I chalked it up to old wiring. When I finally finished, I locked up and walked back to the main house for dinner. That night I was more tired than the night before, and I crawled into bed around 10 p.m. I slept hard for a few hours, but then, somewhere around 3 or 4 in the morning, I heard those knocks. 3 hard thuds on wood. It felt impossible to ignore. My eyes shot open, and for a second I thought I was dreaming. But then I heard the noise again, spaced out, 3 solid hits. My heart was pounding. I sat up in bed trying to figure out where it was coming from. It wasn't the front door of the house. It sounded a little more distant. Then it clicked. It was coming from the barn. I got out of bed quietly. I pulled on my jeans and grabbed the flashlight from the table next to me. I felt a chill run down my arms. The house was cold, but I also felt nervous. My mind started racing with possible explanations. Maybe a branch was knocking against the barn or some animal got stuck inside. The knocks came again while I stood in the living room, just 3 more. I slipped on my boots without socks and headed outside. The night was so dark that my flashlight beam cut through the blackness like a narrow cone. I could see the ground in a small circle ahead, but everything else was just an empty void. I walked toward the barn, aiming the flashlight at the door. I could see it was still closed. The knocks had stopped. My footsteps felt loud on the grass, and I could hear my own breathing. There was a prickling feeling on the back of my neck, like someone was behind me. but when I swung the flashlight around, I saw nothing. I reached the barn door and paused. I raised my other hand to the old padlock. It was still locked. Everything looked normal, except for the fact that I felt like I was being watched. I unlocked the padlock, yanked the door open fast, and aimed the flashlight inside. I swept the beam across the floor, the walls, and the ceiling. There was nothing. No movement, no silhouettes. The smell of cut wood was strong, and I could see the piles of logs stacked against one wall. The tools were where I left them, and my workbench was untouched. I didn't see footprints, but the floor was a mix of dirt and concrete, so I'm not sure I'd have noticed anything anyway. My mouth felt dry. I called out, "Hello?" But nobody answered. I listened for a few seconds, hearing only my own breathing, then shut the barn door and locked it again. I stood there in the dark for a moment, shining the flashlight around the yard. The trees and shrubs looked like shapeless lumps. The wind was calm. I heard no voices, no footsteps. I headed back inside the house, trying to settle my nerves. But the moment I sat down on the couch, I heard the knocks again. This time they were louder and faster, like someone was banging to get in. My chest tightened. The knocks sounded like they were coming from the barn again, and they had a force behind them that didn't seem random. I grabbed the flashlight and sprinted back outside. My boots crunched on the gravel and my hands started to tremble. I wanted to yell out, "Who's there?" But I felt silly. I approached the barn door and the knocking continued. 3 loud thuds, then a pause, then 3 more, then a pause. But I couldn't see anything through the gap in the door. I shouted, "Hey, you need something?" No response, just the knocks. I felt a surge of adrenaline. I unlocked and opened the door again, shining the flashlight into every corner. The knocks stopped immediately. There was nobody inside. I looked behind the piles of lumber. I walked around the stacks of wood. I even climbed up a small ladder to check the rafters. Nothing. I started to sweat, and my heart was thumping hard. I was fully awake by then, running on a mix of fear and confusion. I stepped outside again and let the door slam shut behind me. I took a deep breath, trying to clear my head. Then I heard the knocks again, but now they were on the inside, knocking to get out. I froze in place. The door was right behind me, and I heard the same 3 hits, one after the other. That's when I felt goosebumps spread all over my arms. It was completely illogical. I had just checked inside. There was nowhere to hide in there. It's a single large space with no separate rooms. No one could be knocking from inside without me seeing them. I turned around and opened the door one more time. Again, I saw nothing. No footsteps, no movement, no animals, no people. Just that stale barn smell. My hands were shaking so much I almost dropped the flashlight. My legs felt weak, but I forced myself to step in and look around again. I banged on the walls with my free hand, checking for any loose panels or hidden compartments. The walls sounded solid. I called out again, my voice echoing slightly. Still no answer. I locked the barn door from the inside this time, pulling the sliding bolt across. Then I walked around in the dark, only guided by my flashlight, examining every corner. I didn't find any holes big enough for a person to hide. I looked under the workbench and behind the stacks of wood. I checked the corners, the rafters, the ceiling. Everything was empty. I felt my stomach tighten with stress. I couldn't explain it. My brain was racing with questions. Was it possible that the knocks were coming from outside, but it only sounded like it was from inside? Could there be some trick of acoustics? Maybe it was an animal hitting the walls. But the knocks had a pattern. 3 in a row, then a pause, then 3 again. That felt too deliberate. I decided to stay in the barn for a while to see if it happened again. I sat on a small wooden stool near the door. I kept the flashlight on, sweeping it around every now and then. I tried to slow my breathing, but my nerves were on edge. The minutes passed with no noise. I started to think maybe it had stopped. After about 10 minutes, I felt my eyes getting heavy. I was exhausted, but I was also too wound up to sleep. Suddenly, I heard knocks again. 3 bangs, but this time on the wall next to me. I jumped to my feet, almost stumbling over the stool. The sound came from the outside wall. right where I had replaced some boards. I pointed the flashlight at the wall, but I was inside, so I couldn't see the outside. I rushed out the barn door, stepping into the yard again. I aimed the light at the wall where the sound had come from. There was nothing but the wooden planks. No sign of an animal or any person. I got close, pressing my ear to the boards. I could smell the fresh wood I'd installed earlier. Then, out of nowhere, 3 knocks sounded again, right there against the planks. It was as if someone was knocking from inside, only I was pretty sure I was the only one inside when I left a second ago. I raced around to the door and went back in. No one. That was the final straw for me. My hands were covered in sweat and my chest felt tight. My mind told me it was time to leave the barn alone and get back to the house. I slid the bolt shut one last time, locked the padlock on the outside, and practically ran back to the house. I slammed the door behind me, locked it, and stood there panting. I tried to listen for any more knocking, but it was quiet. I stood in the living room, staring at the front door, then at the window, half expecting to hear something from outside. Nothing. I sat on the couch and tried to calm down. My pulse was still racing. My arms felt like they had pins and needles. I stayed there until the early morning light started to peek through the windows. I never heard another knock that night. When the sun came up, I stepped outside again. The barn looked normal under the morning light. I walked over cautiously. I opened it up and everything was the same as before. No signs of anyone or anything. No damage, no footprints, no clues. I spent the rest of the day double-checking every corner of the property, feeling tense. I didn't talk to anyone about it. I felt too unsettled to mention it. That night, I kept the barn locked and stayed in the house. I tried to convince myself it was just random noises, wind or an animal. But every time I remembered the pattern of those knocks, I got a shiver down my spine. I stayed up late, reading an old magazine in the living room with all the lights on. I dozed off a few times, but I never heard those knocks again. Over the next couple of days, I tried to go about my repairs, but I always felt uneasy when I walked by the barn. I couldn't help but stare at it, half expecting to see something move. But there was nothing. The days went by quietly. No more knocks at the door. No more pounding from inside or outside. Just the normal sounds of a farm property, wind, leaves, and occasionally some distant animal. I finished the repairs I had planned, but my memory kept going back to that night of the knocks. I still can't explain it. I don't have any proof that someone was there, and I found no tracks or signs of forced entry. All I know is that I heard those 3 knocks again and again, even when I was inside the barn with a flashlight. I didn't see anything. I didn't find anything. But the sound was loud and clear. I can still picture myself standing in the dark, heart pounding, hearing that knocking right behind me. After my last day of repairs, I packed up my tools, loaded them in my truck, and locked the barn one more time. I drove away in the late afternoon and left the place for a while. As far as I know, no one else has mentioned strange knocks since. But I'll never forget how it felt to open that door, see nothing inside, and then hear the banging again from the other side. Even now, when I think about it, my stomach tightens, and I remember the way my hands shook when I turned the key in that old padlock. That's the story. It's not something I can explain logically. It's just what happened during those nights alone on the farm. If I ever go back to spend another vacation there, I'm sure I'll feel that tension every time I walk past the barn door. And if I hear those knocks again, I don't know if I'll have the guts to open it. Maybe I'll just let them knock. Sometimes it's better not to ask questions you might not want answered, but that's the truth of it. 3 loud knocks on the barn door, over and over, with no clear explanation. It still rattles me whenever I think about it. I still remember how loud it was. I had just set my coffee cup down on the table when I heard that sharp snapping sound. It cut right through the low hum of fluorescent lights and the quiet ticking of the wall clock. It felt like the office itself had cracked open. That moment made every hair on my arm stand up. I'd been working late on the 5th floor for weeks. and I always felt something off about that place. But until that night, I never had a concrete reason to feel nervous. I work as an IT technician in a large office building. My job usually involves installing updates, running cables, or troubleshooting computers. During regular hours, there's too much noise, too many people asking for help every other minute. So I prefer to stay late, especially when I have a big list of software updates to deploy. The fifth floor is mostly finance, but they don't use it much at night. There's only a small group that occasionally works overtime, and they're rarely there after 7 p.m. Most nights, it's just me and the slow hum of machinery. I got there around 7:30 that evening, carrying a tote bag with some tools, a few flash drives, and a small thermos of coffee. The corridors on the fifth floor always feel a bit too long. The overhead lights are spaced in a way that leaves patches of dimness in between. Some lights flicker before they settle. The walls are plain white. The floor is a dull beige carpet. There are a few potted plants around, but they all look half dead. I walked to the open area where about 10 workstations are set up in neat rows. I sat at the first workstation, logged in with my admin credentials, and started running the updates. The system told me it would take at least 20 minutes. I decided to do a quick run to the break room to grab a glass of water and maybe stretch my legs. The break room on that floor is small, with an old microwave and a fridge that makes this buzzing noise. There's a coffee machine too, but it's usually out of filters, or the coffee tastes burnt. I filled up a glass with water and took a few sips, but I realized I wanted something stronger. I went back to my desk, poured some coffee from my thermos into a glass cup I found on a shelf, and set it down next to the keyboard. I kept an eye on the progress bar while I sipped my coffee. The building was quiet. I could hear the ventilation system pushing air through the ducts. My nose caught the smell of old carpet and stale office air. My phone was on silent, but I would glance at it now and then. I remember feeling a little uneasy, like someone was behind me. I turned around a couple of times. I saw only empty desks and a few swivel chairs in random positions. I figured it was just my nerves. The fifth floor always did that to me. I finished the first update, moved to the second workstation, and repeated the process. By the time I started the third one, I noticed the coffee in the glass had gotten cold, so I went to take another sip. It tasted bitter and stale. I set it back down, wondering if I should just pour it out. My eyes drifted to the clock on the wall, 8:10 p.m. I made a mental note to speed things up because I didn't want to be there all night. I booted up the fourth workstation and got the same progress bar. Out of habit, I started tapping my foot on the carpet. Time was dragging. I glanced over at a corner of the room. The overhead light in that corner flickered every few seconds. It wasn't a big deal, but it gave the room an unsettling vibe. I heard a faint popping noise from somewhere. It sounded like a plastic bottle cap being twisted off, but I couldn't pinpoint the source. I paused, listened, and waited. Nothing else. I shook my head, chalked it up to the fridge or some random office sound. By the time I stood up to move to the next desk, it was 8:45. I decided to grab more coffee, even if it tasted off. I reached for the glass, took one small sip, and realized it had cooled to a point where it tasted worse than usual. I put the glass down and stepped away for a moment to stretch. My back was sore from sitting hunched over. The place was dead silent aside from that flickering light. I walked to the window and looked out. The streetlights below were bright, but there weren't many cars. I saw a single taxi pass by. Then I heard a noise that sounded like a crack. It wasn't loud at first, more like a subtle pop. I turned toward the desk. That's when it happened. I heard a sudden explosive snap like someone had smacked a ruler against the table right next to my ear. I whipped around and saw the coffee glass on the table. The sides of the glass had a thin fracture running across them. In a split second, it expanded. I swear it looked like the glass was being squeezed by something invisible. The cracks spread outward in a spiderweb pattern, and then tiny shards rained onto the desk. My heart pounded in my chest. I could actually feel my pulse racing in my neck. I jumped back, almost tripping over a chair. My first instinct was that maybe I had done something to cause it. But the glass had been sitting there. I hadn't touched it in a minute. The coffee wasn't that hot anymore, And the room wasn't cold. There was no extreme temperature change that I could think of. The air conditioning was on a stable setting. I stood there staring at the pieces of glass. My hands were slightly trembling and I felt a chill spreading across my shoulders and arms. It felt like the entire floor had dropped in temperature, even if it was just my imagination. I decided to clean it up. I moved carefully around the shards. Some pieces were tiny, almost like flakes of ice. Others were bigger, shaped in odd angles. A small pool of coffee was spreading across the desk, and a few drips fell onto the floor. I grabbed some paper towels from the break room and started wiping the mess. The entire time, my heart was still hammering. The back of my neck felt tense, like someone was watching. I kept glancing over my shoulder. Every time I looked, the room was still empty. The chairs, the desks, and the flickering corner light all seemed normal. But I couldn't shake the sense that something was off. Once I cleaned up most of the mess, I grabbed a trash bag from under the sink in the break room. I swept the shards into it, then knotted the bag. There was a faint smell of coffee and something metallic in the air. My hands were shaking more than I wanted to admit. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the glass was old and had a microscopic crack. Maybe the coffee had some reaction with it. I had no proof, but I wanted a logical explanation. I took the trash bag to the hallway, past the elevator banks. I headed toward the large trash bin near the copy room. When I turned the corner, I thought I saw movement in my peripheral vision. It was just a glimpse, maybe a shadow shifting near the wall. I froze for a second and listened. My breath felt shallow. I heard nothing but the soft whir of the copier in standby mode. I walked over to the bin, tossed the bag in, and let out a nervous sigh. I told myself I was just paranoid. I returned to the desk area. The spot where the cup had shattered still looked damp, so I wiped it again. I glanced at the clock, 9:10 p.m. I felt this urge to get out of there, but I knew I had at least half a dozen computers left to update. I tried to calm down by focusing on the work. I told myself, I just need to finish and go home. I went to the next workstation and logged in. My fingers typed the admin credentials, but they felt cold. I could hear my own heartbeat. The screen lit up, and I started the updates. The progress bar crawled. I tapped my foot again. A sudden clang in the hallway made me flinch. It sounded like someone had dropped a metal tool or maybe kicked something. I got up, walked to the entrance of the open area, and peered down the corridor. The hallway was still empty. The overhead lights buzzed. I smelled something faintly chemical, maybe from a cleaning product. No one was there. I returned to the desk and tried to keep my attention on the computer screen. The update was at 40%. My mind raced with questions. Should I call security? Should I check the other floors to see if anyone else was working late? But I pushed those thoughts aside. I told myself it would only take a bit longer. I tried to stay calm, but my body was tense. My legs felt tight, my neck was stiff. I couldn't shake that feeling of being watched. I finished that station and moved on to the next. More progress bars, more waiting. The fluorescent lights above me started that soft buzzing again. The corner light flickered. I noticed my reflection in the black monitor before I powered it up. My eyes looked tired, with dark rings under them. My hair was a bit messy and the ID badge around my neck felt heavy. I pressed the power button and typed in my credentials again. This process was second nature, but I was struggling to focus on it. At around 9:45, I checked the last two computers. I told myself, almost done. I glanced at the floor where the glass had shattered. I kept expecting to see more shards or some piece I'd missed, but it was clean. The incident replayed in my mind. The snap of the glass was so loud. It felt deliberate, like something or someone wanted me to notice. I wiped my palms on my jeans because they felt damp with sweat. A few minutes later, I decided to take a quick walk around the perimeter of the office space to ease my nerves. I passed by the finance manager's office. The blinds were shut and the door was locked. I passed by a few cubicles. They were empty, with computer monitors turned off. Nothing unusual, but the hairs on the back of my neck wouldn't lie flat. My heartbeat still felt too fast. The air seemed heavier than normal, though I saw no logical reason for it. I finished the walk and ended up back at the workstation. I started the final update at 10:05 p.m. I watched the progress bar climb slowly. My foot tapped uncontrollably. I stared at the desk, remembering how the glass cracked. That memory made me swallow hard. My throat felt dry. My mind jumped to the building's known quirks. Sometimes the power would flicker, or the AC would make banging sounds. But I'd never seen a glass just shatter like that without being touched or exposed to a big temperature change. I wondered if it was some pressure difference in the room, but I couldn't see how that made sense. When the update hit 100%, I exhaled a shaky breath. I locked the computer, gathered my tools, and shoved them into my tote bag. I slipped my phone into my pocket, grabbed my keys, and headed toward the elevator. The hallway was dead silent except for the steady buzz from the lights. My shoes made soft thuds on the carpet. I pressed the elevator button. The up arrow lit up first, then switched to down when I pressed it again. A weird glitch, I guess. I waited for the doors to open, feeling that prickly sensation on my skin again. The doors slid open with a quiet ding. The elevator was empty. I stepped in, pressed the button for the ground floor, and watched the doors close. For a moment, I felt relief, like I was escaping that strange tension on the 5th floor. Then, as the elevator started moving, it jolted slightly. My heart skipped a beat. It continued downward in a smooth glide after that small jolt. The numbers ticked down, 4, 3, 2, 1. When the doors opened in the lobby, the usual security guard was sitting at his desk, scrolling through his phone. He barely looked up. I considered telling him about the glass shattering, but I wasn't sure how to explain it. I just gave him a quick nod as I walked toward the main doors. The chill from outside air felt good on my skin. I took a deep breath. The night was dark, and a few streetlights illuminated the empty sidewalks. I felt a slight tremor in my hands, the aftermath of all that tension. I got into my car, tossed my bag on the passenger seat, and sat there for a moment. I didn't turn on the engine right away. I just breathed in and out, trying to calm my nerves. Eventually, I started the car and headed home. The roads were mostly clear, and the ride took about 20 minutes. The entire time, I kept replaying that glass cracking in my mind. I had never seen anything like it before. I wanted to find a simple cause. Maybe it was a hairline fracture in the glass, or maybe it was a defect. But something about it felt targeted, like it happened at the exact moment I was paying attention. By the time I reached my apartment, my nerves had settled a bit. I parked, locked the car, and walked up to my unit. As I took off my jacket, I noticed my shoulders were still tense. I tried to shake it off. I went to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water in a plastic cup this time, and took a long gulp. The water felt cool going down my dry throat. I thought about calling a coworker or a friend to talk about it, but it was late. I decided to keep it to myself for the time being. That night, I lay in bed, thinking about the 5th floor. I pictured the rows of desks, the flickering light, and that moment of sudden pressure. I kept hearing that snapping sound echo in my head. Eventually, I fell asleep, but it was restless. I tossed and turned, not able to get comfortable. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the glass cracking again, followed by that intense feeling of dread. In the morning, I tried to brush it off as a freak accident, but a part of me couldn't let it go. I told myself I'd avoid the 5th floor for a while, maybe do remote updates or schedule them when more people were around. I didn't want to be alone there at night anymore. I didn't talk to anyone else about it at the office, mostly because I wasn't sure what to say. A glass just exploded on me for no reason. It sounded ridiculous, still the memory is clear. Even as I say this now, I can see the shards spreading across the table. I can hear that loud snap, feel the chill crawling up my arms. I don't have a neat explanation, and that bothers me, but I'm not eager to test it again. Whenever I walk onto that floor now, I catch myself checking the desks and corners, making sure everything is normal. So far, nothing else has happened. But I'm still on edge. I keep waiting for that moment when I hear another loud crack behind me. It's a tension I haven't been able to shake. That's the story of the night I saw a glass shatter on its own. I was the only one there. and I couldn't find a logical reason. It still creeps me out to think about. I haven't used a glass cup in that office since. If I drink coffee there, I use paper cups, and I don't stay as late on the 5th floor unless I absolutely have to. There's a feeling that lingers and I can't ignore it. Something that night wanted me to know I wasn't alone. I'm not saying I believe in ghosts or anything like that, but I do know that the 5th floor doesn't feel the same anymore, and I'm not planning to test it again anytime soon. I moved into my new condo a few months ago. The place looked fine on the surface. The neighbors seemed quiet and the hallways were clean. Nothing felt off when I first arrived, but I noticed something unsettling about the parking garage. It was located in the basement below the main lobby. The walls and ceiling were all concrete. The lighting was uneven, with a few dim bulbs scattered around. There was a ramp leading down into that space, and at night, hardly anyone parked near the far end. I usually got home pretty late because of my job. My shift ended around 10:30 p.m., and by the time I wrapped up, drove back and entered the building, it was close to 11 p.m. Most residents seemed to park upstairs in the outdoor lot. They said it was more convenient and felt safer. I understood their reasoning. That underground garage gave me a strange vibe right from the start. On a particular night, I pulled in at my usual time. The ramp down was empty, and the only sounds were the soft hum of my engine and the echo of my tires rolling over the concrete floor. My headlights swept across the rows of empty parking spots. Some sections were darker than others. I took one near a far column. It was a habit. I liked parking where it felt secluded, away from the entrance. I figured fewer people would brush against my car. I turned off the engine and sat there for a second, checking my phone for messages. The overhead lighting in my spot flickered a bit. The air felt cold. I remember feeling a subtle chill on my arms. I rubbed them and took a deep breath. Then I glanced through the windshield. On the other side of the garage, near another column, I saw someone standing perfectly still. This person appeared to be a few rows away, not very tall, but not short enough to be a child either. They looked like they might be somewhere in their 20s or early 30s. The figure wore plain clothes, maybe dark pants and a light-colored shirt. That person wasn't moving. Arms hung down by their sides. The face was turned directly toward me. My immediate reaction was to check if the figure needed help. It was almost 11 p.m., and that person was standing there, not even close to any car. It looked strange. There was no movement, not even a nod. I felt a wave of unease in my stomach. My pulse sped up. I remember blinking a few times, trying to adjust my vision to the dim lighting. I reached for my headlight switch and flicked the beams on and off once. I wanted to get some response, maybe a wave or a sign that everything was okay. Nothing happened. I turned off the headlights. My eyes struggled to readjust. I opened the driver's side door and stepped out. My shoes tapped against the concrete floor. The sound echoed. I glanced over my hood, trying to see that figure again. At first, I didn't notice anything. I took a few more steps, circling around the front of my car. The air felt stale. The overhead lights hummed. A faint mechanical buzz came from somewhere, maybe a ventilation fan, but the person was gone. There was no sign of anyone in that spot. I muttered something under my breath. Maybe I'd seen a shadow. Maybe it was a trick of the light. I walked a few steps toward the spot where I had seen them. I looked behind the nearest column. Nothing. My heart pounded as I checked around. Empty. I heard a clang from somewhere in the distance, possibly a metal door shutting on another floor, or the elevator machinery. The place felt deserted, though. I decided to let it go and head to my apartment. That night, I didn't sleep well. I kept thinking about that figure standing there, staring at me with no expression. There was an unsettling energy about it. The next day, I tried to shrug it off. I went to work. I told myself I was overreacting. Still, every time I thought about driving home, I felt my chest tighten. 2 days later, Around the same time, I entered the underground garage again. The ramp was quiet. The security booth at the entrance was empty. The guard usually stayed at the main gate outside. I figured he'd left the internal booth vacant. I eased my car into my usual spot, killed the engine, and scanned the area. No one was around. I sighed in relief. I got out, locked the door, and started toward the elevator. My footsteps echoed. The elevator was at the far corner. It was one of those slow, older models. I pressed the button and waited. That's when I sensed movement to my left. I turned my head and saw a shape slip behind a column. My heart jumped. It wasn't a large shape, but definitely adult-sized. I called out, "Hey, you okay?" My voice bounced off the concrete, no answer. My skin prickled. I considered checking behind the column, but something in my gut told me not to. I pressed the elevator button again and kept my eyes on that spot. The elevator finally arrived with a dull ding. I stepped inside and jabbed my floor number. The door slid shut. The last thing I saw through the gap was the empty row of parking spaces. Upstairs, I ran into a neighbor on my way to the mailboxes. I asked if anyone else used the lower garage at night. She shook her head. She said she always parked outside. She mentioned that only a handful of residents bothered to use the basement. That made me wonder who I had seen. I didn't want to sound paranoid, so I let the subject drop. Later, in my apartment, I felt tense. I locked my door and double-checked the peephole. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe it was a trespasser or some homeless person who slipped in. But we had security gates and cameras. Still, something about that figure's stillness felt off. It didn't seem like someone rummaging for valuables. There was no movement that suggested a search for anything. It was just pure, silent presence. A week passed without any new sightings. I parked late as usual. Sometimes I would look around, but I saw no one. Then, one night, I arrived earlier than normal, around 9:30 p.m. That was unusual for me, but I'd swapped shifts with a coworker. The underground lot was better lit at that hour. A few more cars than usual were scattered around. I parked and walked toward the elevator. Halfway there, I heard the elevator open. I saw the security guard step out. He was an older man, probably in his 50s. He wore the standard uniform with a walkie-talkie on his hip. He greeted me. I asked if I could talk to him about something. He nodded. We walked over to a corner of the garage near the elevator. I told him I'd seen someone twice standing around at night in that far area. I asked if the cameras caught any suspicious activity. He scratched his head and let out a short laugh. He said, "So you saw that person too?" His tone was casual, but I noticed a slight tremor in his voice. I asked what he meant. He told me that several residents had reported a similar figure. Some said the person just stood there. Others said they heard faint footsteps. But every time security checked, they found no one. The cameras didn't show anything unusual. At least, not that they could confirm. A few frames here and there seemed blurry, as if the feed glitched, but nothing that pointed to a definite presence. He said, "I've heard rumors about a lonely person wandering down here, but no one claims to know them. They're not on any tenant list, not a guest anyone recognizes." That sent a chill through me. I could feel the hairs on my arms stand up. I asked if the guard thought it was a ghost story or something else. He shrugged. He said some folks believed it was just a rumor spread by a few nervous neighbors. Others swore it was real. He admitted that he sometimes felt uneasy in the basement at night, especially in the far corners, but he never caught a clear glimpse of anyone. I thanked him for the information and rode the elevator to my floor. My fingers felt numb. My pulse was still racing. At least now I knew I wasn't imagining things. A few nights later, I decided to test something out. I parked in a different spot, closer to the entrance. If that figure showed up again near my usual spot, I might see them from a different angle. I turned off my car and sat in the driver's seat with the lights off. I watched the area where I'd seen them the first time. The place was silent. My eyes flitted around, scanning each column, each pocket of shadow. The hum of the building's ventilation system droned in my ears. After a few minutes, my eyes started to burn from straining in the dark. I blinked and leaned back. That's when something flickered in the corner of my vision. A shape slid behind a column 3 rows over. My heart pounded. The shape was too quick for me to get a clear look, but it was definitely human-sized. I grabbed my phone and turned on its flashlight. I stepped out, shining the light ahead. The cone of light revealed concrete walls, a few parked cars, and nothing else. I took a few steps toward the column. My hands trembled. My stomach churned. The air felt stale and heavy. When I reached the column, I found no one. I let the flashlight roam around. It illuminated the dusty floor and a few scuff marks. I looked between the parked cars. The corners were empty. Not a single trace of a person. My breathing became shallow. I kept checking behind me, feeling exposed. The silence pressed down on me. After a minute, I retreated to the elevator. I felt sweat trickle down my neck. Once I got inside, I realized my heart was hammering so hard that I could hear it in my ears. The days turned into weeks. Sometimes I wouldn't see anything at all, and I'd think it was over. Then, out of nowhere, I'd catch a glimpse of that figure again. Always near a column, always just outside the range of the light. No one ever approached me or spoke. The guard kept telling me that no new evidence showed up on camera. He said other residents mentioned seeing the same thing, some person with a blank stare just standing there or moving away quickly when spotted. I started to wonder if I should stop using the basement altogether. But my assigned spot was down there, and I didn't want to fight for a free space on the street or in the crowded outdoor lot. I told myself that as long as the figure didn't come close or do anything threatening, I could handle it. I installed a dash cam in my car, angled toward the front. I hoped to catch a recording. I wanted proof that something was actually there, but the footage always showed an empty stretch of concrete. One night I stayed out later than usual, meeting a friend for a late dinner. When I pulled in, it was almost midnight. I felt my nerves spike as I drove down the ramp. The place looked deserted. I parked near the elevator this time. I wasn't in the mood to investigate. I just wanted to get upstairs. I grabbed my bag and hurried toward the door leading to the elevator lobby. As I rounded the corner, I heard a soft shuffle behind me. My muscles tensed. I spun around, shining my phone's flashlight. For a split second, I saw part of a sleeve disappearing behind the wall. It looked light-colored, possibly gray or white. My throat went dry. I walked faster. The noise of my shoes hitting the floor sounded painfully loud. I reached the elevator and jammed the button. I stood there, my back pressed against the stainless steel door. I scanned the garage, left to right. Nothing moved. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. The elevator arrived. I dove inside and mashed the button for my floor. The doors closed. I let out a shaky breath. Up in my apartment, I dropped onto the couch. My chest felt tight. I flipped on the TV just for some noise. My phone vibrated with a text from a friend, but I ignored it. I couldn't shake the image of that sleeve vanishing behind the concrete wall. The next morning, I told the security guard everything. He sighed and said he'd do another round of checks. He also mentioned that some residents were pushing for an investigation by the condo management. Nobody had reported any actual break-ins, though. Nothing was stolen. Nobody was harmed. There were just multiple reports of a figure down there who vanished when approached. Without solid proof, management saw it as speculation or paranoia. I still park in that basement. I see the guard patrolling sometimes. He shines his flashlight around the rows of cars. He's never found anyone lingering for more than a moment. Some nights are quiet. Some nights I hear a shuffle or glimpse a movement near a column. I never find anyone when I chase after the sight. It's made me jumpy. My hands sweat when I grip the steering wheel and I check my mirrors obsessively. Now I share this story because it still bothers me. I can't explain it. I've asked others in the building if they have any information about a person who might be wandering around. They either say they haven't seen anything or they nod and say, "Yeah, I've heard about that." Nobody seems to have a real answer. The security cameras continue to show normal, everyday footage. Yet every so often, a blurry shape appears on a frame or two. Then it's gone. I don't stay in that underground garage longer than I have to. I park, lock up, and head to the elevator. If I see any sign of movement, I pick up the pace. The guard told me last week that he's still keeping an eye out, but there's been no breakthrough. I don't know if it's a stranger with some strange habit of hanging around, or if it's something else that defies explanation. I just know it's real enough to make me tense up every time I drive down there. That's the situation. It's been going on for months. I haven't solved it, and management hasn't done anything special about it. Nobody's been hurt, and nothing's gone missing. But that figure is there. I see them from time to time, standing, staring, then vanishing. Maybe one day I'll get a clear shot with my phone or my dash cam. Maybe they'll reveal themselves. Or maybe I'll just keep parking and hoping that I'll never come face to face with whoever or whatever is in that basement. For now, though, I live with it. And every night, when I turn my key in the ignition and drive down that ramp, I hold my breath and wonder if I'll see them again.